Hey everyone, per your requests, I'm starting Sword of Coming, chapters 321 through 330 of the previous episode. At Sword Water Villa, Qian Ping'an struggles to adapt his martial arts into swordplay. His true test arrives when Sword Saint Song Yuxiao confronts a 10,000-strong royal army alone. Stubbornly loyal, Qian follows to protect the old man. Unleashing his bonded flying swords and incredible martial agility, Qian boldly pierces the enemy ranks and captures their general, turning the tide of battle. Later, a visiting Confucian scholar mystically observes Qian, marveling at his remarkably pure soul. Thank you. Now let's get back to the story of Sword of Coming audio series. Only after it was absolutely certain that Zhou Ju and the elderly mountain master had left the villa did she enter the main hall, and after taking a seat, she began to communicate with Song Fengshan through mental transmission. She was a qi refiner while Song Fengshan was a martial artist, so in order for mental communication to take place between the two, one had to at least be a 5th-tier qi refiner, while the other had to be a 4th-tier martial artist at a minimum. Song Fengshan's wife continued to play the role of the perfect hostess, assuring everyone that there was no need to be concerned, while Song Fengshan sat in a confident silence. Outside of relief, he was also feeling some other mixed emotions. His grandfather really had managed to oppose an entire army on his own. Not only that, but he had even managed to capture Chu Hao, thereby saving him a great deal of trouble. On top of that, Song Yuxiao and Qian Ping'an had joined forces with Su Lang, who had been convinced to switch sides by Song Fengshan's secret letter, and the three of them had faced off against Lin Gushan and the owner of the case purchasing pagoda. The outcome of that battle was that Lin Gushan had been decapitated by Su Lang, and with that, the sword immortal had slain the sword paragon. The only blemish on what was otherwise a perfect campaign was that the owner of the case purchasing pagoda had managed to escape using a secret technique, despite suffering severe injuries, and that could be a problem in the future. Song Fengshan declared to the young woman in secret, "Once all is said and done, I'll follow through on our agreement and help you become an official mountain god of water combing nation. You'll attain a godly body and you'll be able to benefit from the worship of others, but let me make this clear in advance. If you want to be able to make rapid progress in your cultivation and continue to reap benefits after you become a mountain god, then you'll still have to act according to my plan. For the next few decades, you have to go against your true nature and perform good deeds in order to win over the people. If you ruin my plans by going back on our agreement and returning to your old ways, then I'll be forced to strike you down as an enemy. I certainly know better than to go against you, esteemed young villa master," the young woman replied through mental communication with a seductive smile. A solemn look then appeared on Song Fengshan's face as he continued. "Also, I have to trouble you to make a trip to the city and inform Han Yuanshan that there's been a change in the current state of affairs. Even though Zhou Ju has presumably set off back to the academy, I'm sure there will be more people coming after him, so he'll have to make a decision on whether he wants to continue to execute his plan of posing as Chu Hao to gain a foothold in Watercombing Nation's imperial court." The young woman heaved a forlorn sigh, and she rose to her feet, preparing to set off for the city. "Whether it's in bed or elsewhere, it seems I'm destined to slave away for others. Oh, by the way, make sure to ask Qian Ping'an for the armor pellet that he took from Chu Hao. You have to obtain that armor pellet no matter what, whether it be by paying for it or doing him some favors in exchange. If Yuanshan chooses to take the risk and pose as Chu Hao, then that armor pellet will be an important item for identity verification." "I'll take care of that," Song Fengshan replied. The young woman knew that Song Fengshan didn't like to be nagged, so she didn't say anything further and promptly departed from the hall. Meanwhile, Song Yuxiao and Qian Ping'an were making their way toward the courtyard in the villa that the latter was staying in. While making their way back through the mountains, Qian Ping'an was attacked by the owner of the case purchasing pagoda, who had already been lurking in ambush for quite some time by then. After that came Lin Gushan, who engaged Song Yuxiao in battle. If Qian Ping'an and Song Yuxiao had been in peak condition, then there would have been no degree of ambiguity at all to the outcome of that battle, and they would have been sure to crush their two assailants. However, Qian Ping'an was severely mentally taxed, so he was unable to control 1st and 15th with anywhere near the same level of proficiency as before. As a result, he was only able to fight the owner of the case purchasing pagoda to a standstill. As for Song Yuxiao, he was able to gain a slight upper hand, but Lin Gushan was in peak condition, and their battle wasn't going to be decided anytime soon, so Song Yuxiao was unable to help Qian Ping'an in his battle. After that, the green bamboo sword immortal and the young mama had arrived on the scene, and it seemed like each side would be receiving an ally, but theoretically, Lin Gushan's camp should have had the upper hand, with Su Lang joining forces with Lin Gushan to face Song Yuxiao, while the young mama assisted Qian Ping'an in his battle against the owner of the case purchasing pagoda. However, the situation took a completely unexpected turn from there. with Su Lang decapitating Lin Gushan with a single strike. The owner of the case purchasing pagoda immediately fled the scene upon seeing this. In a last-ditch effort, Qian Pingyan was able to control 15th to pierce through the assassin's abdomen, but the latter was ultimately successful in his escape. The young mama seemed to have been going all out, throwing a fearsome-looking barrage of attacks at the owner of the case purchasing pagoda, but it was all for show. After all, whether a foreign boy lived or died didn't have much of a bearing on the state of water-combing nation. Furthermore, Qian Pingyan was an unpredictable individual outside of her control, so perhaps it would be better if he died. On this day, Su Yuanxia and Zhang Shanfeng were both absent from the villa, having been convinced by Qian Pingyan to go to the small town early in the morning. He had told them that they were going to set off on this day for the ferry station on the border. Qian Pingyan hadn't tried to hide anything from them, revealing the nature of the situation in a direct and forthright manner. Zhang Shanfeng had insisted on coming with him, but he was stopped by Su Yuanxia, who dragged him to the town. After sitting down beside the stone table, Song Yuxiao mused, "Chu Hao is most likely dead." Qian Pingyan offered no response to this. Just as Wang Iran's daughter had been responsible for her actions when she had pointed the scabbard of her saber at Qian Pingyan, Chu Hao was also responsible for his own fate as a general leading an army against Sword Water Villa. Qian Pingyan pulled Chu Hao's armor pellet out of his sleeve and handed it to Song Yuxiao. Earlier, the young mama had asked him for the armor pellet, but he had refused to give it to her. Song Yuxiao waved a hand as he said, "You were the one who captured Chu Hao, so this armor pellet belongs to you." Qian Pingyan shook his head in response. "I want you to have it, Senior Song. That woman was really desperate to secure this armor pellet from me, and I'm sure it's not just a matter of money for her. I didn't give it to her because I don't like her character and the way that she does things." Song Yuxiao smiled as he offered, "How about I give you all of our villa's light snow coins? Otherwise it wouldn't be fair, and I would be owing you a favor on top of the money that I already owe you. As for whether Fengshan has enough money to spend, just leave that to him. Given how capable he's shown himself to be, I'm sure he can acquire a few thousand light snow coins if he wants to." Qian Pingyan smiled as he said, "Between true friends, it doesn't matter if one owes the other a favor. You can just treat me to some wine the next time I come to visit the villa." Song Yuxiao shook his head in response. "You were the one who said that owing someone favors is more painful than owing someone money, yet you're now saying that it doesn't matter if friends owe each other favors, so which is it? You can't just change the rules as you please." Qian Pingyan removed his sword-nurturing gourd from his waist, then took a relaxed swig of wine from it. This was not a swig of wine taken to disguise an exchange of breaths. Instead, it was a genuine swig taken purely for enjoyment. "If you don't see me as a friend, then do as you please and return everything that you owe me, whether that be money or favors. After that, we can cut all ties with each other, and I won't come to the villa for a drink even if I'm passing through water-combing nation." Song Yuxiao hesitated momentarily, then finally accepted the armor pellet with an exasperated look on his face. "What's going on with you all of a sudden? You're getting me all confused. Back when I was an apprentice at the dragon kiln in my hometown, my teacher in pottery firing taught me a saying, 'I either disregard even a cow or scrutinize even a needle.'" Qian Pingyan replied. "What's that supposed to mean?" Song Yuxiao asked with a puzzled expression. Qian Pingyan was a little embarrassed as he explained. "It means that between close friends, one can give the other something as valuable as a cow without any return, but when it comes to doing business, even a needle's worth of money must be closely scrutinized." This was obviously a saying that had been passed down in the small town, rather an adage that could be found in any books, but back in the Blusher prefecture of Colorful Garment Nation, Daoist Chong Miao had said something similar prior to his death. Hence, Qian Pingyan was convinced that this saying was correct, albeit a little rough around the edges. Song Yuxiao immediately burst into laughter as he pointed a finger at Qian Pingyan and declared, "You're definitely going to be a very rich man in the future." Qian Pingyan cupped his fist in a grateful salute as he replied with a bright smile, "I certainly hope so." Song Yuxiao rose to his feet with a smile as he said, "I'll go back to the villa to take care of some things, then I'll treat you to a meal of hot pot in the town. After that, you and your friends can set off for that ferry station." Qian Pingyan nodded in response, and following Song Yuxiao's departure, he returned to his room and changed into a set of clean clothes. He then left a ready-made golden treasure pagoda demon-suppressing talisman on the table, and placed a wine cup on top of it as a paperweight. He had accepted 300 light snow coins from Song Yuxiao back when they left the battlefield, as he didn't want Song Yuxiao to feel bad. Over the course of his journey, Qian Pingyan's personality had changed quite a bit, and he had turned from a hillbilly who had never even touched a drop of wine into a little drunkard who knew the difference between fine and crude wine. However, there were some aspects of his personality that remained unchanged, and they would most likely stay that way even after centuries or millennia. A short while later, Song Yuxiao returned to the courtyard with a small package and 2 jars of fine wine. Chen Ping'an's wine gourd was filled once again, and even after that, there was still a jar of wine left over for them to drink while having hot pot in the town. As for the package that contained the 300 light snow coins and some other items, Song Yuxiao was holding onto it for Chen Ping'an for the moment. After departing from the courtyard, the two of them were greeted by the elderly villa steward, who cupped his fist in a salute toward Chen Ping'an as he said with a smile, "Please come visit our villa often, young Master Chen. From this year forth, our Sword Water Villa will prepare a lot of Huaidiao wine specifically for you. So whenever you come to visit, you'll always get to enjoy the finest aged Huaidiao wine. I'll definitely be sure to make frequent visits then," Chen Ping'an declared as he returned the salute. After that, Song Yuxiao and Chen Ping'an flew out of the villa once again. The old steward remained standing on the spot, looking on at their departing figures with a warm smile on his face. In his eyes, the old villa master had undergone a drastic change for the better. In contrast with the gloomy disposition that he had displayed for the past few decades, it was as if he had returned to his youth, and he was once again full of flair and vigor. With Song Yuxiao in such high spirits, the steward was confident the villa would remain at the top of water-combing nation's cultivation world for at least several more decades. Shortly thereafter, the old steward departed from the courtyard on a casual stroll. Along the way, he encountered the 2 maidservants responsible for the maintenance of that courtyard, and in an extremely rare display, he greeted them with a warm smile rather than his usual solemn expression, much to the bewilderment of the 2 maidservants. As Chen Ping'an and Song Yuxiao arrived in the town, the spies sent by the imperial court had already departed well in advance. They met up with Su Yuanxia and Zhang Shanfeng at the restaurant, and the 4 of them enjoyed a hot pot together on the 2nd floor. In the wake of Song Yuxiao revealing his own identity during his last visit, the restaurant shopkeeper was initially a little timid and reserved, and only after Song Yuxiao called him an idiot and encouraged him to lighten up did he finally feel a bit more comfortable and relaxed. Zhang Shanfeng didn't have a very high spice tolerance, but neither did he want to back down from the challenge, so he could only continue to force food down his throat even as his eyes and nostrils wept. In an unusual display of cruelty, Chen Ping'an told him that drinking wine would help alleviate the burn, and that resulted in Zhang Shanfeng spitting up a mouthful of wine all over Chen Ping'an's clothes. Song Yuxiao wanted to enjoy himself wholeheartedly for this meal, so he didn't use his cultivation base to stave off the effects of the alcohol, and before long he was getting a little drunk. He spoke to Chen Ping'an about many things that came straight from the bottom of his heart, and they chatted about anything that sprang into their mind. "Listen to me, Chen Ping'an. I know you like to preach, but that's not a habit that'll earn you many friends. Girls don't like to be preached to, and men aren't much better in that regard. Everyone has their own struggles, and the last thing someone wants when they're in a foul mood is for someone to preach to them. If the things that you preach aren't correct, then I suppose it's not so bad, but if they know what you say is right, but simply can't do it, then that would only make them even more frustrated." The combination of wine and spicy food was making Chen Ping'an's tongue a bit numb, but he still slurred in response. "I like to preach from time to time, but I never have verbal altercations with anyone. At the very worst, I'll only fight them." Song Yuxiao also imparted some relationship wisdom upon Chen Ping'an. "Chen Ping'an, if a girl ever tells you that you're a good person, then that means she likes me, right?" Chen Ping'an asked with a hopeful expression. Song Yuxiao slammed a hand down onto the table as he chortled with mirth. "My arse. That means you have no chance with her anymore." Chen Ping'an was astonished to hear this, and he hurriedly took a large swig of wine to calm his nerves. After a filling meal, Chen Ping'an's trio parted ways with Song Yuxiao at the end of the street. As the 3 of them faded away into the distance, Song Fengshan silently appeared beside Song Yuxiao with a rusty iron sword strapped to his waist. Song Yuxiao continued peering into the distance as he heaved a faint sigh. Song Fengshan harumphed coldly. "Am I your grandson or is he your grandson?" Song Yuxiao could only chuckle in response. Despite the indignant tone in Song Fengshan's voice, there was a faint smile on his lips. As it turned out, the package that Song Yuxiao had given to Chen Ping'an contained all of the 2,000 or so light snow coins in Sword Water Villa's possession, and not a single coin was left for the villa. Chen Ping'an had been goaded into drinking cup after cup of wine by Song Yuxiao, to the point that he was completely drunk and had to stumble out of the restaurant, so he had forgotten to examine the contents of the package slung diagonally across his back. Ultimately, the sly old fox had come out on top against the sprightly young buck. Over the course of the journey to reach Sword Water Villa, Chen Ping'an had a lot of things on his mind, so the atmosphere had been rather gloomy and sullen. In contrast, the atmosphere during this trip to the ferry station on the border was completely different. The three of them revealed many of their secrets to one another, and that significantly solidified their relationship. One night, while camping on a mountain summit, Xianxia had something to drink and spoke about that horrific incident that had resulted in the deaths of all of his friends. Feng also opened up in a rare display, speaking about his background and his master. In the process, he accepted the wine gourd offered to him by Ping'an and drank freely out of it in a very uncharacteristic manner. While speaking about his master, spiritual master Fire Dragon, Feng erupted into a torrent of abuse, speaking so harshly about his master that the unknowing would have been led to believe that they were sworn enemies. However, despite his harsh words, it was clear from the look in his eyes that he missed his master greatly, and during the more emotional parts of his story, he had to pretend to take swigs of wine to conceal the tears in his eyes. While telling his story, Feng sneezed many times, and Xianxia had made a joking remark, wondering if his master could hear him all the way from another continent, and that if he were omniscient, then perhaps he really was a heavenly master of Mount Longhu. In response, Feng had scoffed that his master was no heavenly master. In fact, according to him, the old Taoist priest had never been to Middle-earth Divine Continent even once in his life. He was constantly going on about how he had to go to Mount Longhu to pay his respects to his ancestors, but that would always be followed up by some type of excuse, such as his back being sore or his legs acting up. Outside of that, he would sleep for prolonged periods of time, often sleeping 10 to 15 days in a row without waking up even once. The most prolonged instance of this was on an occasion where it had snowed for 2 months straight, and the old Taoist priest had stood in the wind and snow atop the cliff and slept for the entirety of those 2 months. Only after the snow had completely melted did he finally wake up. Prior to that, his disciples had already packed their things and were eager to go on their agreed-upon trip to Mount Longhu with their master, but of course that completely fell through. In summary, the old man didn't display a single ounce of sincerity, and he completely disregarded all of the complaints directed at him by his disciples. Regardless of what they said, he merely treated their words as wind blowing past his ears. Ping'an also mentioned Mr. Qi, despite not being prompted. After all, Mr. Qi had met both Xianxia and Feng when he appeared in the ancient temple in Watercombing Nation that night. However, all that he revealed was that he had grown up in Jewel's small world, and that Mr. Qi had served as a schoolteacher there for many years. It wasn't that Ping'an was reluctant to speak about Mr. Qi. Instead, he was worried that if he began talking about Mr. Qi while in his inebriated state, then he would end up talking about nothing else that entire night. During the brief homebound journey he had taken with Chui Chan, the latter had been very disgruntled by how quiet Ping'an always was, so he would constantly try to show off to Ping'an by telling him about what things were like at the pinnacle of the cultivation world, such as the interesting plans that the sages of all of the 100 schools of thought had on all of the continents. Chui Chan was always quite vague when discussing such topics, only revealing tidbits of information and intentionally withholding the rest, so Ping'an was never able to get a grasp on the full picture, but just the tidbits revealed to him alone were enough for him to realize that Chui Chan had told him about some extraordinary things. Ping'an also spoke about his experience in striking the waterfall, and the strides that he had made in his cultivation base as a result. As a fellow martial artist, Xianxia was astonished to hear this. Even though he had already guessed at Ping'an's potential, he still couldn't help but give Ping'an a thumbs up while showering him with praise, predicting that he would surely rise to the top of the martial arts world someday. In contrast, Feng was rather perplexed, so Xianxia gave him an example, telling him that Ping'an's current cultivation base was the equivalent of a cultivator on the cusp of breaking through the bottleneck of the lower 5 tiers to reach the cave abode tier. Only then did Feng come to realize just how incredible a martial artist Ping'an was, and he immediately began lamenting to the heavens, wondering if all of his hard work in cultivation had been eaten by dogs. Ping'an and Xianxia then burst into laughter and began picking on Feng together. They knew that Feng wasn't in need of consolation as his mental fortitude wasn't inferior to Ping'an's at all. He didn't fear powerful demons, nor did he fear the rigors of cultivation. The only thing that he feared was not having enough money to fill his stomach. The journey after leaving Sword Water Villa proved to be a very smooth one, and having experienced the perils of the Blusher Prefecture and the festivities of Sword Water Villa, the trio was left feeling a little dejected in contrast. Thankfully, it didn't take them long before they reached the border pass, and all 3 of them had legitimate passports, so even though rigorous checks were conducted, they were still able to progress smoothly through the pass and continue on their journey to the chief military governor's manor. The package that had been given to Ping'an by Song Yuxiao contained close to 2,000 light snow coins, as well as a letter that had been personally written by the old sword saint. and all Chen Ping'an had to do was present the letter to the chief military governor's manor to be granted approval from the imperial court to enter the forbidden area. Upon arriving at the entrance of the manor, Chen Ping'an approached one of the guards to announce the purpose of his visit, but what he failed to anticipate was that these border soldiers didn't understand the official dialect of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. Chen Ping'an didn't know the official dialect of Watercombing Nation, so there was a language barrier and a lot of gesturing, but not much progress being made. After a brief stalemate, the soldier gestured for Chen Ping'an to wait, then sent in one of his comrades to deliver a report, and before long, a scholarly old man in a Confucian robe emerged from the manor. He was fluent in all of the official dialects of the entire continent, and Chen Ping'an handed the letter from Song Yushao over to the old man. The old scholar accepted the letter with both hands, then hurriedly brought Chen Ping'an's trio into the side hall, where they could take a seat. After some tea was brought to them, the old scholar rushed away to the office of the chief military governor, and it didn't take long before a short old man with a dark complexion arrived in the side hall. He wasn't wearing any armor or official robes, and a rather wooden expression was on his face as he handed 3 bronze seals over to Chen Ping'an, then promptly departed without uttering a single word. Even as the 3 of them were leaving the chief military governor's manor, Chen Ping'an and Zhang Shanfeng were still feeling a little flabbergasted at how efficient the unremarkable-looking chief military governor was. When it comes to generals who have climbed all the way to the top from the very bottom, none of them will have very chatty personalities, Xianxia explained. In the Imperial, there's a saying that important figures always speak last. Speak last? He didn't speak at all, Zhang Shanfeng retorted. The 2 of them had already been informed by Chen Ping'an about the battle that had been taken place earlier, so they were aware of the imperial court's attitude toward Sword Water Villa, and Xianxia said, "It's already quite remarkable that the chief military governor was willing to see us and even provide us with those 3 seals at a time. He must be very close friends with Sword Saint Song. I'm sure someone who's a friend of Senior Song's can't be a bad person," Chen Ping'an chimed in with a nod. Xianxia and Zhang Shanfeng exchanged a smile, following which the latter jibed. "You're starting to get a little crafty with your words, Chen Ping'an. Wasn't that just a roundabout way to compliment yourself? Those who are friends of Senior Song's friends also can't be bad people," Chen Ping'an added. Xianxia immediately gave him a thumbs up as he exclaimed, "I like the sound of that." Zhang Shanfeng slung an arm across Chen Ping'an's shoulders as he praised. "That was a perfect save." The 3 of them burst into laughter as they left the border pass through the southern gate, then continued southward with a bronze seal hanging from each of their waists. They were going to enter the territory of the ferry station in less than 100 kilometers, and while resting on a small hill along the way, Chen Ping'an started a fire to cook a meal. During this time, some people had observed them in secret from afar, but they quickly departed instead of approaching them, presumably because they had spotted the seals hanging from their waists. None of them drank any wine with their meal. They were about to enter a ferry station that was filled with qi refiners, so it was best to proceed with caution. Xianxia had come here mostly to see off Chen Ping'an and Zhang Shanfeng, but if there was a ship traveling to Azure Phoenix Nation in the southeast of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, then that would be even better. As for the shop selling immortal treasures in the ferry station, he was a pure martial artist, and he had just obtained an exceptional weapon, so he had no interest in visiting them at all. Zhang Shanfeng wanted to purchase a Taoist sword, as well as to replenish his supply of talismans, such as divine movement talismans. He also wanted to find someone to appraise that pair of divine cloud bamboo chopsticks. As for the white bowl capable of condensing spiritual energy into dew and the armor pellet that Chen Ping'an had given him, there was absolutely no way that he was going to sell those 2 treasures. In fact, he was going to keep them concealed the entire time he was in the ferry station in case envious onlookers decided to target him for his treasures. Chen Ping'an had already decided that he wasn't going to be selling anything that he had brought with him from Downtrodden Mountain. He had decided to keep the premium snake gall pebble that Xiaoyang had returned to him back on the Kuan ship. Following the fall of Jewel Small World, there wasn't a single snake gall pebble left in the Dragon Whisker River and the Iron Talisman River, and all of them had been reduced to ordinary rocks. Chen Ping'an had heard that snake gall pebbles were unique to Jewel Small World, which meant that this was not only an exhaustible resource, but also in very short supply already. The longer he held on to them, the more precious they would become. He also had to make sure to conceal the scholarly core that had been gifted to him by city god Shen, one of the Blusher Prefecture, as well as the golden statue shards and silver shards that he had obtained. The heavenly master seal that had the words Colorful Garment Nation Blusher Prefecture City God Protection Seal engraved upon it was the treasure that Shanwen had cherished the most. In his words, divine artifacts should only be wielded by beacons of morality. It was said that this seal had to be used in conjunction with the 5 lightning righteous technique to unleash its full power, and as soon as Qian Ping'an learned of this, he immediately thought about giving the seal to either Zhang Shanfeng or Lin Shui, the latter of which was still studying at Mountain Cliff Academy. However, after much deliberation, he decided not to give the seal to either of them, not because he didn't want to, but instead because it didn't feel appropriate. In his mind, even if he were to give the seal to one of those two, it would have to be at a later date, both to give himself time to truly understand what being a beacon of morality entailed, and also to give one of Zhang Shanfeng or Lin Shui the time to develop into such a vaunted figure. In the past, Qian Ping'an would have given the seal away without a second thought, but that was no longer the case. As for the piece of ebony that had still retained some vitality even after being struck by lightning, the white bowl with a painting of the 5 mountains, and the talisman that contained the beautiful skeletal ghost, Qian Ping'an planned to get them appraised to determine their prices before he decided if he wanted to sell them or not. He was confident that the shops in the ferry station wouldn't force him to sell his possessions against his will. The light snow coins that Qian Ping'an had received from Song Yuxiao, coupled with the light snow coins and the lesser heat coins that he had received from the little boy in azure, amounted to a total of around 4,000 light snow coins. Just the mere thought of that put him in a very good mood, but the next thought that sprang into his mind immediately soured his mood again. Wei Bo and Cui Chan's grandfather had both told Qian Ping'an something similar in the past, which was that he had to reach the 4th tier before entering Stalactite Mountain, as only then would he be able to gain a stable foothold on the Sword Qi Great Wall. There, he would be able to refine his own body and soul with the most abundant sword intent under the heavens, and that would definitely be immensely beneficial to any pure martial artist of the 3 Qi tempering tiers. According to Cui Chan's grandfather, if he couldn't reach the 4th tier, then he shouldn't even bother going to Stalactite Mountain at all, as he would only be making a fool out of himself. Even if he could make his way up there, there was no guarantee that he would be able to crawl his way back down. All he would be able to do would be to deliver the sword to Ningyao at the foot of the Sword Qi Great Wall, then scurry back to Downtrodden Mountain with his tail between his legs. That wasn't what Qian Ping'an wanted. Instead, he wanted to stay up there for as long as possible. Before long, a line of 7 or 8 people emerged, then began making their way along the path at the foot of the mountain. None of them appeared to be mortals, and Qian Ping'an's trio merely took a glance at them before looking away. When in foreign lands, be wary of Taoist priests and monks, and when traveling through the wilderness, avoid women and children. This was an unspoken rule among cultivators, and if one were to encounter a fellow cultivator, it was best not to look too much at them, as you never knew when you could encounter a short-tempered cultivator that could snap at the drop of a hat. The people passing through also only took a brief glance at Qian Ping'an's trio before looking away. They hadn't reached the ferry station yet, but the several dozen kilometers that they had left wasn't going to take very long to cover at all. They were about to part ways, and even though they had agreed not to drink, Qian Ping'an couldn't help but take a sip out of habit. Zhang Shanfeng asked for a drink as well upon seeing this, and Qian Ping'an handed his wine gourd to him. In the end, Su Yuanxia also had a sip, and the 3 of them took turns passing the wine gourd around, taking sips out of it one after the other as they sat on the summit of the hill in silence. After a prolonged period of silence, Su Yuanxia began to tell a story. I was once a soldier, and I served in the border army, so I was fighting in battles all the time. I couldn't bear to see the people around me constantly dying, so I left the army to travel the world, but even then, there were still constantly people dying around me. You may not believe this, but I came from a highly educated family, so it was actually quite a surprise to everyone when I chose to join the army. We weren't particularly wealthy, but we were certainly a well-respected family where I came from. In the blink of an eye, it's already been many years since I last went back. What was supposed to be my hometown now feels like something from a previous life. Su Yuanxia's beard was soaked with wine as he sat with his legs crossed, and a reminiscent look appeared in his eyes as he continued. Before joining the army, I was somewhat of a scholar, so I was more educated than most of my comrades, but that didn't matter. All of the books glorify soldiers and proclaim that we fight for the sake of our nations, but in reality, all of us are solely focused on earning money and accolades. We kill to avenge our fallen comrades, and because it's cathartic, that's it. However, there's nothing cathartic when we're the ones being struck down by our enemies. When we're having our wounds sewn up or having arrowheads pulled out of our bodies in those blood-stained tents, all of us end up howling and crying like little girls, and no one is in a position to make fun of anyone else. Zhang Shanfeng exhaled as he fell onto his back. He couldn't drink any longer. Otherwise, Qian Ping'an would have to carry both him and Su Yuanxia on his back. He looked up at the bright blue sky as he sighed. My master always says that I have great aptitude, and that I made the right decision to embark on the path of cultivation rather than participate in the imperial examination, but I have no idea where my aptitude lies. Perhaps it was also eaten by dogs. I really want to find those dogs and beg them to return my aptitude to me. It's not like they'll have any use for it anyway. I'll need all my aptitude if I want to be able to slay demons and vanquish fiends in the future. Once I become powerful enough, I'll no longer have to feel any guilt. I'll be able to protect all of the people who pay for my services, instead of having to watch them succumb to evil forces while I flee like a coward. It was often the case that people became more willing to spill their guts in an inebriated state, but Chen Ping'an was the opposite and would only get quieter the more he drank. He sat on the ground as he listened to his two friends tell their stories. He held onto his wine gourd with both hands as he cast his gaze into the distance, taking a glance at the north before turning to the south. In this instant he felt like he didn't have a care in the world. Zhang Shanfeng had promised himself that he wasn't going to get drunk, but ultimately, he ended up being carried by Su Yuanxia down the hill. Su Yuanxia's footsteps were still quite steady, but he had become chatty in his inebriated state, and he began reciting many poetry passages, the final one of which was, "For the finest of wine even 1,000 cups won't suffice." That was followed by a loud burp and nothing else. Chen Ping'an smiled as he continued in Su Yuanxia's stead. "But when it comes to wives, even 2 are too many. You must be the least ambitious sword immortal in history." Su Yuanxia scoffed with a roll of his eyes. "That's great sword immortal to you." Chen Ping'an immediately corrected him. "And don't forget me. I'm a great heavenly master," Zhang Shanfeng murmured in his sleep. As it turned out, the ferry station on the border of Watercombing Nation and Pinestream Nation was a thriving little town, and upon arriving here, Chen Ping'an almost felt as if he had returned to his hometown. The streets were packed with pedestrians, and there weren't actually many qi refiners among them. Instead, the majority of them were merchants and mortals, the latter of which had already been living here for generations. All of the streets were lined with shops, and at this point Zhang Shanfeng had already woken up. However, he was still feeling a little woozy and unsteady on his feet, while Chen Ping'an and Su Yuanxia had sobered up long ago. "My advice is that we don't try to ask around at too many shops. We should just go straight to the biggest shop in the best area in the town," Su Yuanxia advised. Following this advice, the 3 of them arrived at a large shop with a plaque that read Green Beetle Pavilion, hanging above its entrance. It was a 5-story pavilion that towered over all of the nearby buildings, and it also took up quite a large area. There seemed to be a spacious courtyard behind the building with tall trees growing inside, and the sound of flowing water could be heard, but it was unclear where it was coming from. There was a set of couplets on either side of the shop's entrance, and they read, "Young and old welcome, our prices are fair as can be. We serve you wholeheartedly, so you can buy from us without qualms." There were no employees on the street outside encouraging customers to come in, but as soon as the 3 of them made their way into the shop, they were immediately greeted by a young woman dressed in opulent attire. There was a green insect hovering above each of her shoulders, and they looked as if they were carved out of green jade. "Welcome. Would you like to have treasures appraised or browse our shop's wares?" the woman asked in the official dialect of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. As the woman was speaking, the 2 insects began to circle around all 4 of them while emitting a faint buzzing sound. This was so that their conversation wouldn't be overheard by anyone else in the shop. Su Yuanxia smiled as he replied, "We'll have some treasures appraised first, then take a look at what your shop has to offer. If you have treasures that suit our needs and your prices really are as fair as you claim, then we'll consider buying a few things." The woman smiled as she introduced, "The first floor is for treasure appraisals. Spirit tool appraisals are conducted on the 2nd floor, the immortal treasure appraisals are conducted on the 3rd floor, and the stairwell is over there. You can go to any floor you'd like first, and I'll be right after you." "Let's go to the 2nd floor first," Su Yuanxia suggested, then began to make his way toward the stairwell, followed closely by Chen Ping'an and Zhang Shanfeng, while the young woman brought up the rear with a faint smile on her face. She was in luck. Seeing as these customers were going to the 2nd floor, she would most likely be able to make some good commission. There were a few other young women on the 1st floor who weren't inferior to this young woman in the looks department, and all of them were looking on with a hint of envy in their eyes. However, there was nothing that they could do as there was a preset sequence that they had to follow when it came to serving customers, so how much they would be able to earn was down to their luck. Having said that, all of them generally earned roughly the same yearly income, and even if someone were to suddenly make a killing in a short time, the rules of the Green Beetle shop ensured that no one else would know about it. Hence, such an occurrence would be kept a secret unless that person revealed it themselves. Upon reaching the 2nd floor, the young woman began to lead the way again. There was a long embroidered ground gown produced in colorful garment nation draped over the corridor, and its quality wasn't inferior in the slightest to the one in the main hall of Sword Water Villa. The young woman led the three of them to the entrance of a room, then gently knocked on the door, and only after an elderly voice told her to come in from the other side did she open the door. She then stepped away to the side, allowing Qian Ping'an's trio to enter the room first. There was a large table inside the room, and seated behind it was a sprightly old man. There was a small incense burner on the table releasing wisps of fragrant smoke, as well as a potted bonsai plant with a tastefully arched trunk and branches that extended outward far and wide. There was a row of tiny green-robed figures seated atop one of the branches, and they were chatting quietly among themselves, but as soon as Qian Ping'an's trio entered the room, they immediately rose to their feet in unison and extended a collective bow as they said in a tender and childlike voice, "Welcome, esteemed customers. We hope you find what you're looking for." Qian Ping'an was astonished by what he was seeing, while Su Yuanxia displayed no reaction, not because he wasn't also stunned, but because he was a seasoned traveler who knew how to hide his emotions. As for Feng, he was a cultivator to begin with, and even though he was very poor right now, he had seen many things back when he was cultivating in his sect, so Qian Ping'an was the only one who was made to appear like an ignorant hillbilly. Just this minor detail alone was enough to convince the young woman to place most of her attention on Su Yuanxia and Feng. In her eyes, Qian Ping'an had to be some itinerant cultivator who had only been able to embark on the path of cultivation thanks to some stroke of luck, so there wasn't much need for her to focus on him. "What would you like to have appraised today?" the old man asked with a smile. "I specialize in the appraisal of bronze artifacts, calligraphy pieces and artworks, and wooden treasures. As for items of other descriptions, I wouldn't dare to say that I'm an expert in all of them, but I've been sitting here in this room in the Green Beetle shop for over 40 years, and I can count on one hand the number of times that I've made a wrong appraisal, so you can place your trust in me." Feng pulled the pair of bamboo chopsticks out of his sleeve before handing them to the old man. The old man's eyes immediately lit up at the sight of the bamboo chopsticks, and he made no effort to disguise his intrigue as he rose to his feet before accepting the chopsticks with both hands. After sitting back down, he carefully set the chopsticks down onto the table in front of him, then pulled a special silken handkerchief out of a drawer and used it to meticulously wipe down his fingers and the palms of his hands. Only after that did he pick up the pair of chopsticks and begin inspecting them in an enthralled silence. He set down the chopstick with Divine Cloud Bamboo inscribed upon it. He picked up the one that bore the inscription of Azure Divine Mountain, then heaved a forlorn sigh as he turned to Feng with a wistful expression. "These chopsticks are made from absolutely exceptional materials. These are most certainly from Bamboo Sea Small World, and in all likelihood, they were crafted from the Divine Cloud Bamboo grown on Azure Divine Mountain. Ever since Azure Divine Mountain was sealed off, the price of items crafted from Divine Cloud Bamboo has gone up significantly. In fact, the rate of inflation has been nothing short of incredible. It's just a pity that these were crafted into a pair of chopsticks instead of a ghost-striking whip. This is so extravagant that it's downright excessively wasteful." The old man became more and more worked up as he spoke, and at the end, it looked as if he were ready to pick a fight with the maker of these chopsticks. The old man gently stroked the inscription of Azure Divine Mountain on the chopstick with his finger as he murmured to himself in self-consolation. "Then again, if this were a Divine Cloud Bamboo ghost-striking whip, then you would have gone straight to the 3rd floor, and I wouldn't even have had the chance to see these chopsticks. Bamboo Sea Small World is such a huge small world, yet it's home to only a single mountain god. And that's Lady Zhu of Azure Divine Mountain. The founder of fictionism once described Lady Zhu in writing as a beautiful barefoot woman with hair unmatched in its luster. It was only a very brief description, but it painted the picture of an exquisitely beautiful goddess." The old man was already completely lost in his own thoughts. The young woman who had led Qian Ping'an's trio to the 2nd floor was feeling a little awkward, but internally, she was absolutely jubilant. It seemed that she was going to be making a killing today. Thank heavens they didn't go to those shameless sluts on the 3rd floor. The women up there all seem innocent and beautiful on the surface, but they're all filthy vixens who would do anything for money. Any man who has money immediately becomes the most handsome man in the world to them, regardless of how old or hideous they are. Even after the deal is done, they still shamelessly cling to those men like glue, taking them to the private rooms in the courtyard in the back to pleasure them with their bodies. Shameless. Disgusting. Despite her scathing thoughts, she also couldn't help but be envious of those women on the 3rd floor. What was she lacking in comparison? Her skills in bed certainly weren't inferior, and even in the case of female customers, she had certain methods and was confident in her ability to please them. If uninterrupted, it looked as if the old man could ramble to himself for the rest of the day, so Feng could only interject. "Sir, all I want to know is how much this pair of chopsticks is worth." The old man immediately snapped back to his senses, then turned to the young woman with a smile as he asked, Chuang, I can still take one more treasure for my own collection this year, right? The young woman was rather taken aback to hear this, but then quickly smiled as he replied, You are indeed able to claim one more treasure this year, Mr. Hong. However, we still have to observe the normal procedure and show these chopsticks to the deputy shopkeeper on the top floor before you can have it for your private collection. Of course, the old man replied with a wide smile. The old man then turned to Zhang Shanfeng with a serious expression as he said, In terms of benefiting one's cultivation, these chopsticks have next to no effect. However, if these were to appear in a mortal empire, then it will be sure to become highly sought after for all of the wealthiest figures and most powerful officials of the land. Whenever some food is picked up with these chopsticks, some spiritual energy will rub off on it, and that would strengthen the consumer's body and extend their lifespan. As long as they don't suffer premature deaths or are struck down by any major illnesses, these chopsticks could easily add 3 to 5 years to someone's lifespan. Furthermore, the fact that they're crafted using divine cloud bamboo from Azure Divine Mountain will further increase their value. In particular, for collectors looking for such items, they would most likely be willing to pay anything to get their hands on these chopsticks. The old man took a glance at the chopsticks on the table, and an ecstatic look appeared in his eyes as he continued, Our green beetle shop. No, I Hong Yanghua would like to offer 450 snowflake coins for these chopsticks. Rest assured, I can guarantee you that no matter where else you go, whether that be taking these chopsticks to someone else in our green beetle shop or to any of the other 16 shops in our ferry station, you won't receive a higher offer than this. The average market price for something would only be 300 to 400 snowflake coins at the very most, and I'm only willing to offer such a high price as I'm really fond of wooden artifacts, and I still have one opportunity left to purchase an item that I appraise this year. What do you say? Would you be willing to sell these chopsticks to me? A beseeching look appeared in the old man's eyes as he continued, I really can't go any higher than 450 snowflake coins. If you're worried that I'm trying to swindle you, or you don't believe in the reputation of our green beetle shop, then I'm happy to take you to our deputy shopkeeper, or even accompany you to all of the other shops in the ferry station for additional appraisals. Zhang Shanfeng took a glance at Xianxia, and the latter gave a slight nod in response. Zhang Shanfeng grinned as he raised a hand and spread all 5 fingers as he declared, I'll sell them for 500 snowflake coins, take it or leave it. The young woman turned her head to the side to conceal her amusement. She knew that given Mr. Hong's personality, once he encountered something to his liking, he would be willing to spend any amount for the item, as long as he could afford it. The old man gave himself a slap across the face, but even so, he was still ecstatic as he rose to his feet and replied, You have yourself a deal. Chuang, make sure to handle these chopsticks with the utmost care, and take them to the deputy shopkeeper on the top floor for appraisal. Once it's verified that the price I've offered is fair, I'll pay our customers here out of my own pocket, and of course you'll get your commission as well. The young woman did as she was told, carefully picking up the chopsticks before departing in an elegant manner. Xianxia knew that this was a favorable deal for Zhang Shanfeng, an extremely favorable one even. Meanwhile, Chan Ping'an was still standing beside the table, huddled over the branch of the bonsai tree to look at the tiny green-robed children. He felt like these little guys were really interesting and adorable, and he was thinking about whether he should collect some himself to give to the little girl in pink on Downtrodden Mountain as a present. She would most likely be quite fond of them as well, and with them keeping her company, she wouldn't get bored in the bamboo building. Meanwhile, the tiny green-robed children were also quite intrigued by Chan Ping'an, as it wasn't every day that they encountered a hillbilly who seemed to be amazed by everything that he saw. Hence, both sides were looking back at each other with intrigued expressions. As for Hong Yanghua, he was sitting behind the table, humming a joyful tune that it didn't take long before the young woman returned, and she handed the pair of bamboo chopsticks to the old man with a smile as she said, The deputy shopkeeper has asked me to congratulate you, and he also said that you're not allowed to show off these chopsticks to him the next time you two have a meal together. In his dreams. There's no way I'm not showing them off, the old man immediately retorted. He then quickly stowed the pair of chopsticks away before opening a drawer and pulling out 5 lesser heat coins, which he handed to Zhang Shanfeng. Generally speaking, in transactions that take place in large shops, 1 lesser heat coin is equivalent to 100 snowflake coins, but everyone knows that when it comes to transactions that take place in private, each lesser heat coin is generally worth about 104 or 105 snowflake coins. Zhang Shanfeng nodded in response with a smile as he accepted the 5 lesser heat coins, then turned to find that Chan Ping'an and the green-robed children were still making faces at each other like idiots. He nudged with his elbow as he scoffed, Quit playing dumb. These are for you. I still owe you the principal, but the interest has been paid off at least. If you feel like that's too much, then you can deduct these 5 lesser heat coins out of the principal instead. As for the rest, I'll just have to repay you in the future. After learning the true value of that armor pellet from ancient Elm Nation, Zhang Shanfeng knew that he couldn't pretend as if he were still oblivious just because they were friends. The true value of the armor pellet far exceeded the 500 snowflake coin price tag that Qian Ping'an claimed, and it had to be treated as such. Qian Ping'an accepted the 5 lesser heat coins and stowed them away up his sleeve as he declared, "We're even now. Otherwise, I give you back your money, and you return the armor pellet to me." Zhang Shanfeng offered no response to this. Xianxia patted him on the shoulder with a smile as he said, "That's not a bad outcome. If you keep insisting on paying him back in full, then that would be a little pretentious of you." Only then did Zhang Shanfeng begrudgingly agree to this arrangement. Qian Ping'an slung an arm around Zhang Shanfeng's shoulder as he smiled and said, "If you really can't get over it, then how about you sell me your peachwood sword?" Zhang Shanfeng immediately pushed him away. "Don't even think about my peachwood sword. Hey, don't shove me. A gentleman never resorts to violence," Qian Ping'an exclaimed. Xianxia shook his head with a resigned expression, feeling as if he were babysitting a pair of kids. Meanwhile, the young woman turned to Qian Ping'an with a hint of surprise in her eyes. Could it be that he's actually the richest one of the three? Zhang Shanfeng turned back to the old man with a smile as he declared, "I don't have anything else I want to sell." The old man was very disappointed to hear this, but Qian Ping'an immediately said, "I have some things I would like you to appraise, sir." The old man immediately sat up straight, then smiled as he extended a hand toward Qian Ping'an. "I'm looking forward to what you have to show me." Qian Ping'an pulled out the white bowl with the true appearances of the 5 mountains painted on it, then set it down onto the table. The old man slowly inspected the bowl with a calm expression, then set it down as he said, "What's been painted onto this bowl appears to be the true appearances of the 5 mountains of ancient Elm Nation. Our green beetle shop is willing to offer 150 snowflake coins for it. If these were the true appearances of the 5 mountains of a large empire, then that price would increase by several fold. It's just that the 5 mountains of ancient Elm Nation only contain very limited spiritual energy, so the effects of such a painting on this bowl will be significantly reduced." A reminiscent look appeared on the old man's face as he spoke, and he began recounting a story from years past. Several decades ago, the shop that profited the most from these bowls was none other than the cloth wrapper shop, which had secretly amassed a huge stock of them. At the time they had truly made immense profits. After that, countless smaller shops followed the trend and began purchasing bowls from them, but who would have anticipated that the emperor of the Greatly Empire would suddenly make such a drastic decision to change all of the 5 mountains? Countless merchants were left completely out of pocket in the wake of that decision. Thankfully, our shopkeeper had the foresight to go against the widespread trend and refused to purchase even a single bowl at what he believed to be a clearly overinflated price. It was thanks to his foresight that our green beetle shop was able to avoid a disaster. Qian Ping'an patiently listened until the old man was done with his spiel, then asked, "So what is this bowl capable of?" "My apologies, I always get a little carried away whenever I talk about how incredible our green beetle shop is. Let's get back on track," the old man said in an apologetic fashion, then pointed at the bowl with a smile as he continued. 5-colored state soil is something that every nation must have, but where does it come from? Aside from 5-colored soil that arises naturally in blessed locations, such soil can also be made artificially, and that's where bowls come in. One can place soil taken from the 5 mountains into one of these bowls, and after some period of time, the length of which depends on the quality of the bowl, a small batch of 5-colored soil can be produced. Of course, 5-colored soil can also be sold. Given the quality of the bowl that you have, if you can secure a sufficient supply of soil from the 5 mountains of ancient Elm Nation, then on an annual basis, you'd be able to make this sum. The old man spread a hand open, and the young woman had to conceal her face behind her sleeve to conceal her amusement again. "Is that 50 snowflake coins?" Qian Ping'an asked. "5. The old man corrected with an amused expression. The old man then explained, "Many spirit tools, one that can continually generate income over a long period of time, have their price set at the amount of income they can generate over the course of 60 years. If you can earn 5 snowflake coins per year, then 60 years would equate to 300 snowflake coins. It may sound like I'm trying to swindle you by offering only half that sum, but rest assured, there's a reason for this. 5 mountain bowls are rather special. For some nations that are very unstable, their 5 mountain bowls could be worth nothing at all. The entire nation could cease to exist overnight, and with it, the 5 mountain would naturally be gone as well. In that case, where would the 5-colored soil come from? Fortunately for you, ancient Elm Nation is quite a stable nation at the moment. Our green beetle shop has never had much interest in purchasing 5 mountain bowls, so offering half the theoretical price is already quite a favorable deal for you. Qian Ping'an thought about it for a moment, then asked, "Can I not sell this bowl?" "Of course," the old man replied with a smile. "To be honest, if I purchase this bowl for the Green Beetle shop today, only for Ancient Elm Nation to fall overnight, then I run the risk of having some of my wage deducted. Even though it wasn't a profit of 50 snowflake coins a year, 5 snowflake coins were still equivalent to 5,000 taels of silver, and even the most expensive houses on Peach Leaf Alley cost fewer than 1,000 taels of silver. Of course, now that Jewel's small world had descended and become part of the Great Li Empire, house prices in the small town had already risen drastically, but even so, 5,000 taels of silver was still enough to buy quite a few houses in Dragon Spring Prefecture. His top priority now was to write a letter to Wei Bo and Cui Chan's grandfather right away, requesting them to try and help him secure soil from the 5 mountains of Ancient Elm Nation. During his return from Stalactite Mountain, he was also going to personally pay a visit to the 5 mountains of Ancient Elm Nation, and take back as much soil with him as he could carry. Hopefully, at that time, he would still have sufficient spare space left in 15th. Right at this moment, Xianxia suddenly said, "I think you should sell the bowl." The old man had gotten very worked up over that pair of bamboo chopsticks, but now that he had regained his composure, he was still a very shrewd businessman, and he said, "You must be thinking the Great Li Empire's southward expansion is inevitable, so Ancient Elm Nation may not be standing much longer, right? I actually disagree with that opinion. With Lakeview Academy standing firm in the central region of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, I don't think the Great Li Empire's troops will be able to march southward as they please. Even if they do manage to march all the way to Ancient Elm Nation, there are so many nations in between that it'll take them many years to get to that point." Seeing as the old man was being so forthcoming, Xianxia also decided to express his opinion on the matter. "In my eyes, even with Lakeview Academy standing in their way, I still think it won't take too long before the Great Li Empire's forces march into the south." The old man merely smiled and offered no response, not wanting to argue over this matter. The Green Beetle shop was a business, and he had nothing to gain out of arguing with customers over trivial subjects. Xianxia turned to Qian Ping'an as he advised, "A bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush." Qian Ping'an turned to Xianxia, and the latter gave him an encouraging nod. Qian Ping'an returned the nod, then immediately set the bowl back down onto the table as he asked, "Does your offer still stand?" The old man smiled as he replied, "Of course. If our Green Beetle shop ends up making a loss on this sale, then I have no one to blame but myself for my lack of sound judgment, and I'll just have to accept the wage deduction." With that, the bowl was handed over in exchange for 150 light snow coins. Just as Xianxia had said, it was much better to have money in hand than to rely on a tenuous and unpredictable projected future profits. After that, Qian Ping'an decided to have that piece of ebony and the talisman that contained the beautiful skeletal ghost appraised as well. The old man had appraised the piece of ebony first, and he was full of praise for the item, offering a price of 300 light snow coins. He also told Qian Ping'an that the piece of ebony would be highly sought after among many agrarian and Medichinist cultivators. As for that talisman, he was only willing to offer 50 light snow coins. After some thought, Qian Ping'an decided to sell only the piece of ebony while keeping the talisman. That was all that Qian Ping'an and Zhang Shanfeng had to sell, and next it was time to spend some money. The old man personally accompanied them to the door, and even as they were leaving, he didn't forget to propose a wager to Xianxia. "If you ever get the chance to come again, we can see how things are going in Ancient Elm Nation, and the one who made the wrong prediction has to treat the other to a drink. What do you say?" Xianxia smiled as he replied, "Sounds good to me. Regardless of whether I lose or win the bet, I would be honored to have a drink with you, Mr. Hong." "You're far too kind," the old man chuckled. "Just for that, I'll treat you to a drink first next time." Xianxia cupped his fist in a parting salute. Upon hearing that Zhang Shanfeng wanted to purchase a Taoist talismanic sword capable of slaying demons and vanquishing fiends, the young woman led the 3 of them straight to the 4th floor, then took them to a large room with a wooden plaque that read "Cold Light" hanging above the entrance. There were guards stationed at the entrance of the room, and the young woman informed them that she was here with some customers, then gently pushed the door open to reveal shelves upon shelves of swords of all types of descriptions, and the entire room was filled with formidable sword qi. However, much to the young woman's disappointment, Zhang Shanfeng inexplicably declared that he had lost interest as soon as he stepped into the room. "Don't mind him, we'll still have a look at the swords," Qian Ping'an said to the young woman. Zhang Shanfeng stubbornly refused to enter the room, but in the end, Xianxia forcibly dragged him inside. The young woman introduced around a dozen Dao swords of different prices to them one after the other, And even though Zhang Shanfeng tried to feign disinterest the entire time, he still couldn't help but take an extra glance at one of the swords, namely an antiquated bronze sword. The word was missing its scabbard, and there was a rather indistinct inscription on it that read, "True Martial." The blade of the sword was riddled with scratches, so even though it had been forged out of an exceptional material, the asking price was only 400 snowflake coins. Qian Ping'an immediately decided to purchase the sword, but he hesitated momentarily as he was pulling out the coins to pay. The young woman gave a faint smile, then made a thoughtful gesture of leaving the room to give him some privacy. By the time she returned to the room, Qian Ping'an had already placed the 400 snowflake coins down onto one of the shelves. After counting the money to make sure that it was the correct amount, she slid the true martial into a ready-made scabbard before handing it to Qian Ping'an. The four of them then made their way out of the cold light room, but instead of taking the trio out of the Green Beetle shop's main entrance, she led them over a hovering covered bridge on the second floor to a tall building in the backyard, and from there, they left the Green Beetle shop through a side door. The young woman then informed them of some of the rules of the ferry station, as well as the routes to take to certain important places, before waving them farewell. As she turned around, the martial artist guarding the backyard of the Green Beetle shop had already closed the side door, and she leaned back against the door as she secretly pumped her fist with an ecstatic expression. However, she then quickly adopted a calm facade, and by the time she returned to the main building of the Green Beetle shop, her elation had already turned to melancholy as she began complaining to her co-workers about how stingy those 3 customers had been. The Green Beetle shop was only less than a kilometer away from the ferry station, and there just so happened to be a ship that was setting sail for Cloud Pine Nation. Even though that was still very far away from Azure Phoenix Nation, it was still going to be countless times faster than if Xianxia were to make the journey on foot. On top of that, upon disembarking from the ship at Cloud Pine Nation, he would be able to immediately board another ship straight to Azure Phoenix Nation. Hence, Xianxia was going to be leaving Watercombing Nation on this ship. As for the ship that Qian Ping'an had to take, it was one that sailed over an ancient route that was over 1,000 years old. Its ultimate destination wasn't Old Dragon City, but it would also drastically shorten the journey of hundreds of thousands of kilometers. As they drew close to the ferry station, Qian Ping'an and Zhang Shanfeng both stopped in their tracks at almost the exact same time. Qian Ping'an was carrying the true martial sword, while Zhang Shanfeng was looking down at the ground, not daring to say anything. Xianxia heaved a faint sigh, then turned to Qian Ping'an as he said, "Back in Blusher Prefecture, Daoist Chong Miao once mentioned that in the southeastern region of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, which is near Azure Phoenix Nation that I'm traveling to, a grand liberation rite of water and land is going to be taking place in half a year's time. Countless esteemed figures of Taoism will be flocking to the event, and even a few Taoist immortals vastly renowned across the entire Eastern Treasured Vile Continent will be hosting lectures there. Of course, Zhang Shanfeng wants to go and take a look, but he doesn't know how to bring up the subject to you. He feels like changing the itinerary on a last-minute basis would be a very scummy thing to do, and now that you've bought him this Dao sword, he feels even more ashamed to have to part ways with you. After all, he promised you from the very beginning that he would accompany you all the way to Old Dragon City. I bet he's feeling so guilty that he wishes he could die right now. You know what? This is perfect. Why don't you put him out of his misery with true martial, then bury him right here?" Qian Ping'an jumped up and slapped Zhang Shanfeng on the head. "What are you, an idiot? You're like an indecisive woman. You don't need to feel like you owe me anything. Take the sword and get out of my sight. You can pay me back for it later." Zhang Shanfeng's head remained bowed, and his shoulders began trembling slightly. Qian Ping'an didn't say anything further as he tossed true martial to Xianxia, then quickly departed on his own. By the time the teary-eyed Zhang Shanfeng raised his head, Qian Ping'an had already made his way into the distance. Right at this moment, Qian Ping'an raised a hand up high and gave Zhang Shanfeng and Xianxia a wave, as if he could sense the former's gaze. The ferry station where Qian Ping'an's ship was set to depart was different from the one for the ship traveling to Cloud Pine Nation. After paying 10 snowflake coins, he received a wooden badge and submitted in exchange the seal given to him by the chief military governor's manor. After that, Qian Ping'an traveled to the ferry station together with dozens of other people. They were directed to the entrance of an underground tunnel, which was around 20 meters wide, and it was riddled with phrases engraved by renowned figures of eras past. The interior of the cave was brightly lit, and everyone made their way to the tunnel for about 15 minutes before arriving in a massive underground hall. The stone walls on either side of the hall were covered in lifelike murals depicting gorgeous celestial maidens adorned in beautiful dresses with long flowing sleeves. The facial features of the women were clearly visible, and they were all quite voluptuous and curvaceous but stopped short of what would be categorized as chubby. Docked at the ferry station was a 3-story luchuan with a dragon's head on the bow and a dragon's tail on the stern. The luchuan was enormous, almost rivaling the size of an imperial warship, but aside from that, it appeared to be no different from the average mortal ship. In addition to the group of people that Chan Ping'an was in, over 300 people were already gathered at the ferry station. There were also all types of shops at the ferry station, most of which were quite small, and instead of plaques hanging above the entrance, they only had signs hanging outside. The shop sold all manners of wares such as calligraphy and art pieces, snakes and fruits, as well as some specialty local products of Watercombing Nation, including small ground gowns, cockfighting cups, pine needle calligraphy pieces from Pine Stream Nation, and elmwood carvings from Ancient Elm Nation. Earlier, Chan Ping'an had paid 10 snowflake coins to rent a room on the second floor, while a room on the first floor only cost 3 snowflake coins, which was equivalent to 3,000 taels of silver. While it was true that this was an immortal ferry station, and the journey was quite a long one, this was still an astonishing price compared with how much it would normally cost to go on a long journey in a mortal empire. Thankfully, Chan Ping'an had traveled on a Kuan ship in the past, so he already knew what to expect. On top of that, after selling the 5 mountain bull and that piece of lightning strike ebony at the Green Beetle shop, he had an additional 450 snowflake coins in his pocket, so he had the money to spare. Additionally, he had to practice his fist techniques and walking meditation every day, so he couldn't afford to be stingy here. There was a chi refiner seated on a taisher chair on a small stone platform at the edge of the ferry station, and he was holding a teapot riddled with spots that made it look like a fat partridge. He had taken countless sips of the teapot, yet the tea inside still hadn't run out. The chi refiner issued a verbal reminder to everyone that the ship was going to be setting off in an hour, and that they could consider buying some quality and affordable specialty local products to take back home before boarding. He then went into particular detail about the ground gowns of Colorful Garment Nation and the bonsai plants of Mountain Orchid Nation, sparing no praise as he vehemently advertised these 2 things. Additionally, he also specifically recommended 2 shops, mentioning them by name. Sure enough, many of the ship passengers were convinced to visit those shops, and this was met with either envy or disdain from the shopkeepers of the other shops, who didn't have funds required to recruit the chi refiner's advertising services. Chan Ping'an was standing among the crowd in silence, and he suddenly thought of Lu Gaohua, the son of the Blusher prefectural overseer, as well as the tree spirit scholar of Ancient Elm Nation and the cockfighting cup that they had been carrying with them at the time. He heard that these cups were far more valuable elsewhere, so he also purchased a pair of cockfighting cups for 1 snowflake coin each. After stowing the poplar box that contained the pair of cups away, he purchased a large bag of fresh fruits, which he carried in his hand. Standing among the throngs of people, Chan Ping'an had a pair of straw sandals on his feet, a sword case and a cloth pouch on his back, and a bag full of fruits in his hand. There were many people on the ferry station, and were all quite tightly packed together, but it was still far quieter here than in the prefectural markets. Everyone mostly kept to themselves or formed small groups chatting quietly to one another. Very few people raised their voices, and some children were unable to suppress their childish exuberance, but they were all accompanied by guardians who held them tightly by the hand to prevent them from running around. When it came to traveling chi refiners, none of them would openly display the sex or powers that they belonged to, and they certainly wouldn't reveal their true cultivation bases. The lower 5 tiers and the middle 5 tiers amounted to a total of 10 tiers. That was set in stone, but humans weren't. The teachings of sages described humans as creatures with similar natures, but vastly differing personalities. The pursuit of the Great Tao was an extremely long journey. Who could predict how the personality of a chi refiner would change over the course of decades, even centuries of cultivation? If one were to constantly act without foresight or discretion, relying on their power to do whatever they pleased, then there would inevitably come a day where they would be punished for their ill discipline and be stomped into the ground by someone else. However, for those who were fortunate enough to belong to prestigious immortal powers, such as Divine Edict Sect, True Martial Mountain, Wind Snow Temple, and particularly Lakeview Academy, they still demanded respect wherever they were on the continent even if they weren't direct disciples, and one certainly had to think twice before crossing such individuals. Additionally, if one were fortunate enough to have a master at the Golden Core tier or the Nascent tier, then that would also ensure their safety under the vast majority of circumstances. Grudges and vendettas among chi refiners could last for the span of several lifetimes for a mortal, so it was never a good idea to make enemies for no good reason. The blood feud between Wind Lightning Field and Sun Scorch Mountain was a perfect example of this. Su Jia had once been a proud celestial maiden who possessed beauty and aptitude in equal measure, yet what had become of her since? Her top-tier sword Nurturing Gourd had been confiscated by her sect, and her sword heart and cultivation base were both in tatters. All of a sudden, she had completely faded into obscurity, much to the dismay and sympathy of countless young male qi refiners who regarded her as the woman of their dreams. Qian Pingyan remained silent as he took sips of wine out of his sword-nurturing gourd, waiting for the ship to set sail. This was going to be a southbound journey of over 100,000 kilometers, and at the destination ferry station would be another ship that traveled directly to Old Dragon City. From there, he would travel to Stalactite Mountain and enter the Sword Qi Great Wall, so he no longer had the chance to explore the world with his friends. Hence, even if he wanted to have a drink, he could only drink by himself. The ship was about to set sail, and the passengers began to board. Qian Pingyan went up the second floor and found his room, which was extremely tiny and cramped compared with the heaven-grade residence that he had stayed in on the Kuan ship. There was only a bed inside the room, and a tiny balcony outside that could fit 2 people standing next to each other. Qian Pingyan set down the bag of fruits, which had cost him over 10 taels of silver, then removed the sword case and cloth pouch from his back before sitting down onto the clean and comfortable bed. As he lay down onto the bed, he couldn't help but think back to his wooden plank bed back in his house on Clay Vase Alley. There was a saying that the poor feared the winter, while the rich feared the summer, but to Qian Pingyan, it felt like even the normal rich had many ways to stave off the heat, let alone almighty qi refiners that were capable of miraculous feats. Qian Pingyan sat up on the bed, then rolled his sleeves and his pant legs, revealing some indistinct talismans on his wrists and ankles, through which true qi was slowly circulating. They resembled invisible restraints, and didn't appear all that remarkable, nor were they recorded in the authentic death-avoiding book gifted to him by Li Shisheng. These talismans were Old Man Yang's handiwork, and they were called True Qi 8-tail talismans. Old Man Yang hadn't explained them in much detail. All he had told Qian Pingyan was that these talismans could allow the true qi in a pure martial artist's body to circulate and refine their physical constitution during their sleep. Furthermore, once Qian Pingyan reached the qi refining tier, these 4 talismans would fade away on their own. However, if he couldn't break through that bottleneck, then once he reached Old Man Yang, he could go to the dust medicinal shop and find Zheng Dafeng, the former gatekeeper of the town, to remove the talismans for him. Qian Pingyan rolled his sleeves and pant legs back down, then made his way onto the balcony. According to the local chronicles of Water-Combing Nation, a true dragon was once being pursued by an immortal, and it fled into the ground, burrowing through the earth with its enormous body to create this underground water channel. In the end, it emerged from the ground at the cave in Water-Combing Nation before flying toward the Great Li Empire in the north. The conclusion of that battle gave rise to Jewel's Small World, and this route was also known as the Dragon Channel because of this legend. There was another channel beside this one, and the 2 channels facilitated easy travel for ships that came from both the north and the south. Between the 2 channels was a fence that seemed to stretch on indefinitely, and a radiant lantern was hanging from the stone wall once every few kilometers, brightly illuminating the nearby channel. However, at night, all of these lanterns would be snuffed out so that the passengers of the ships would be able to sleep without being woken up by the light. The rooms on either side of Qian Pingyan's were quite noisy. The ferry station's regulations on the second-story rooms were quite lax, with a maximum of 5 people permitted to stay in each room. If there wasn't enough space to sleep on the bed, then they would just have to sleep on the floor. 10 snowflake coins was quite a large sum, so not everyone could afford the luxury of having one room to themselves. The path of cultivation was not an easy one to pursue, particularly for itinerant cultivators, who often had to take large risks in order to earn money. If they didn't have any shortcuts or special income avenues, then it was no exaggeration to say that all of them were constantly putting their lives on the line in order to earn funds to support their cultivation, so cultivators were generally very miserly people. Qian Pingyan's room was facing the neighboring channel, and as the ship set off on its journey, he discovered that many people were standing near the railing on the first floor of the Luchuan, holding fishing rods in their hands. They used no bait, simply casting their lines straight into the underground river down below with the bare hooks exposed, and they were essentially trying to hook onto fish through sheer dumb luck by having the moving ship carry their hooks along through the water. Occasionally, there really were some palm-sized fish that were hooked, and they were dragged onto the deck before being casually tossed into fish baskets. Whenever a silver prawn roughly the length of a finger was hooked, then the fisherman would always react with elation. As it turned out, this was a very special creature unique to this underground channel, and in Water-Combing Nation they were referred to as river dragons, while in the south they were endearingly referred to as silver. These prawns were able to absorb spiritual energy from bodies of water, and were considered to be a delicacy among avid foodies. Juvenile prawns were around a centimeter in length, and after around a dozen years, they could grow to reach the length of a finger. Only after 100 years would they reach the length of 2 fingers, and at that stage, it would appear as if they were clad in a suit of translucent jade armor. A century-old river dragon would be extremely delicious and filled with abundant spiritual energy, able to fetch an astronomical price of half a snowflake coin each in the south. If a passenger could fish up 6 century-old river dragons, then that would be their ship fare covered. Not only was this a way to make money, it could also help one pass the time, so why wouldn't they try their hand at some fishing? The only problem was that river dragons the length of a finger were relatively easy to hook onto, but fishing up specimens 2 fingers in length or longer was mostly down to luck. This river channel had already been in existence for over 1,000 years, and it was said that someone had once fished up a river dragon 3 feet long. The river dragon had a pair of golden feelers, and it had been a groundbreaking catch. In the end, it was sold to the master of Old Dragon City, but unfortunately, it was never revealed how much he paid for it. Qian Pingyan had always been an avid fisherman, so he naturally took interest in what he was seeing, and he rested his chin on the railing of the second floor, looking down at the people fishing on the first floor for a long time. As he did so, he thought to himself that there had to be fishing rods for sale on the ship, but he didn't know how much they cost. If he could buy one for a snowflake coin or 2, then he would be eager to try his luck as well when he wasn't practicing his fist techniques. Upon returning to his room, Qian Pingyan had some of the fruits that he purchased earlier, which were quite fresh, but completely devoid of spiritual energy. As he did so, he began to plan out his fist technique practice. The journey was going to take 2 months, and along the way, the ship was going to be making stops at ferry stations in other nations for repairs and supplies. That would add an additional 4 or 5 days to the journey. This ship was far slower than the Kuan ship, but that was only to be expected, considering that the Kuan ship was a continent-crossing ship that belonged to Ceremony Mountain, a major sect of complete reed continent. By Qian Pingyan's estimates, he would spend roughly 5 or 6 hours a day on sleeping, eating, and other menial tasks, which left roughly 18 hours a day for fist technique practice. Now that he had sped up in his fist technique practice, he had a significant advantage over his past self, and he would be able to practice his 6-step walking meditation roughly 3,600 times a day. Over the course of 2 months, that would equate to over 200,000 repetitions. This sounded like nothing more than a simple mathematical calculation, but for a seasoned fist technique practitioner like Qian Pingyan, he knew that putting this into practice would be extraordinarily difficult. Even with his exceptional mental fortitude, he felt this was going to be a titanic task. In the past, regardless of whether he had been traveling to Great Sui Nation or southward to Watercombing Nation, he had always been passing through all types of diverse scenery. However, here on this ship, he was confined to this small room, and the monotony of repeating the same motions for 20 hours a day in such a bland setting would be enough to drive anyone insane. Most importantly, this type of torment was completely different from the torment that he had suffered while practicing fist techniques under Cui Chan's grandfather. The latter was a test of ability to endure excruciating pain over short periods of time, while the former appeared to be far more casual and relaxing, consisting of nothing more than leisurely fist technique practice, but it was a different type of slow burn that would constantly chip away at his sanity. It would be exactly like the winter storm that he had endured while traveling over the boardwalk in Yellow Court Nation to the Great Li Empire, by the end of which every single breath that he took felt as if he were swallowing daggers. It was no wonder that Cui Chan's grandfather had once told him that a martial artist had to contend with heaven and earth, enduring the most unimaginable pain, while also contending with oneself, honing one's mental fortitude through slow and monotonous repetition. Qian Pingyan took a deep breath, and after closing the door of the balcony, he began to practice his walking meditation, treading lightly while throwing swift punches. The days passed by in this continuous monotonous grind, and during this time, Qian Pingyan didn't even go to the restaurants on the ship for meals, merely having some dried rations with wine for sustenance. With the arrival of summer, even though it was quite cool in the underground channel, Qian Pingyan was still sweating profusely every day. He started his walking meditation from the door of his room, and he stopped precisely at the edge of the wooden door leading to the balcony. After one repetition, he would turn around and perform the same motions again. Over time, the floorboards in his room became riddled with sweat stains. Whenever he became utterly exhausted from his fist technique practice, he would take a short nap. Unlike during his previous travels, where there were constantly other things on his mind, he could focus wholeheartedly on his fist technique practice here in this confined room. Throughout the 24 hours of a day, 18 of them were spent on this constant, repetitive grind, while 4 hours were allocated to sleeping and the last 2 hours for breaks. He became completely immersed in the process, and it was as if this room had become his entire world. There were no longer any mountains or rivers, wind, rain, or snow, It was as if the passage of the seasons and all stages of life took place within this tiny space. Over the course of 20 days, the wooden door leading to the balcony wasn't opened even once. One night, Qian Ping'an was laying on the ground with his clothes completely soaked, as were the floorboards beneath him. He was gasping for air like a fish that had just been dragged onto the shore, and he wanted to laugh and he wanted to smile but didn't have the energy to do so. He was wondering what he was going to do if the owner of the case purchasing pagoda were to suddenly attack him while he was in such a vulnerable state. With that in mind, he cast his gaze toward his sword-nurturing gourd. In that situation, he would have to rely on these two precious little divas to save him. Over the next 10 days, Qian Ping'an had to remove the wine gourd from his waist and even take off his straw sandals as well. With his sleeves and pant legs rolled up, he continued to practice his walking meditation back and forth in the room. He already had one foot in the 4th tier, and felt as if all it would take would be one bout of spirited effort for him to drag his other foot into the 4th tier as well, but it was as if that lagging foot were stuck deep in the mud, refusing to budge no matter how hard he tried. Even after an entire month of walking meditation, his progress was still agonizingly slow, and he had only slightly extricated his foot from the mud. During this time, the world around him wasn't completely silent. After growing accustomed to life on the ship, the passengers staying in the neighboring rooms weren't exercising as much restraint as they had initially. The room to Qian Ping'an's left seemed to be housing a group of traveling heroes, and they would feast on wine and meat every single day while conversing freely about whatever sprang into their minds. However, they mostly spoke in the official dialects of other nations, and only very rarely would a few sentences spoken in the official dialect of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent pop up. At certain points throughout the day, Qian Ping'an would snap out of his profound, immersive state, and in those moments, any sound that he heard would rumble like thunder in his ears, so he would become very agitated by the sound of the boisterous conversation ringing out to his left. As for the passengers staying in the room to his right, they appeared to be a group of immortals from a small cultivating sect, and were relatively quiet compared with those staying in the room to the left. However, their cultivation required them to recite the teachings of their sect twice a day, once in the morning and once at night. The soundproofing between the rooms was rather lackluster, and they were using a certain breathing technique, so that was also a source of frustration for Qian Ping'an. All of this was still bearable, but there was something else that happened every once in a while, and it left Qian Ping'an feeling rather exasperated. All of the people staying on the 3rd floor of the ship were quite wealthy, and as time passed, Qian Ping'an came to realize that there was a couple staying in the room directly above his. It was a very affectionate couple, and Qian Ping'an would often hear the sound of their bed creaking through their floorboards. On top of that, the woman seemed to be unable to help herself, and she was constantly weeping to accompany the creaking of the bed, sounding as if she were suffering great pain at the hands of her partner. This left Qian Ping'an quite confused. If whatever they were doing was so painful for the woman, then why did she oblige every single time? If they were a couple, then why couldn't they talk things out and come to a resolution? Qian Ping'an was very exasperated by this, but it wasn't like he could just go upstairs and knock on their door, then urge the man to be more gentle with his Dao partner. This was not something that an outsider like Qian Ping'an could comment on, and it was both inappropriate and unreasonable. Furthermore, Qian Ping'an discovered while he was quite bothered by these noises, the group of men staying in the room to his left treated this like a spectacle to be enjoyed. Whenever the sound of the creaking bed and the whimpering woman rang out, they would immediately cease their conversation, then begin chuckling to themselves. From the few snippets that were spoken in the official dialect of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent that Qian Ping'an could understand, it seemed that they were discussing what they were hearing in earnest, as if they were offering their commentary on a spectacular battle. As for the immortals staying in the room on the right, they would also fall silent whenever these noises rang out, but Qian Ping'an noticed that their breathing would always become a little more ragged. It seemed that just like him, they were also very much bothered by these sounds. Thankfully, it didn't take long before Qian Ping'an began to gradually grow accustomed to these disruptions. On one occasion, the bed overhead was shaking so violently that it was as if an earthquake were taking place, and the woman was wailing at the top of her lungs. Even so, Qian Ping'an merely enjoyed a meal of dried rations washed down with wine in silence, praying to himself that the floorboards overhead would remain firm so the bed didn't fall onto his head. During the few stops that the ship made at other ferry stations, Qian Ping'an was unable to witness the scenery of the southern nations as he didn't even open the door of his room once. After some calculation, Qian Ping'an realized that it was roughly time for crops to be planted, so everyone back home would currently be busy toiling away in the fields right now. Even some of the fit young men working at the dragon kilns would be permitted to go home and help out in the fields. Back when Old Man Yao was still working as a dragon kiln overseer, he was always very lenient when it came to things, even though he had a short temper and a scathing tongue. Other kills would generally only allow a 3-day break for the harvest, yet Old Man Yao would always give 4 or 5 days. Unfortunately, for the likes of Lu Xianying and Chan Ping'an, who didn't have any agricultural land passed down to them, they had to pick up the slack during this time in the absence of their colleagues, so they always ended up even more tired than the people toiling away in the fields. Having already practiced his fist techniques for an entire month, Chan Ping'an had completed over 100,000 repetitions without even realizing it. What he was most interested in right now was finding out how many of the fishermen on the ship had managed to catch those precious river dragons 2 fingers in length or longer. One day, as Chan Ping'an was taking a break from his fist technique practice at around noon, he suddenly noticed that while he still had wine to spare in his sword nurturing gourd, he was running short on dried rations. Hence, he tied the wine gourd to his waist, picked up his sword case, then put on his straw sandals before opening the door of his room for the first time on this journey so he could go to one of the nearby restaurants on the ship to purchase some food. Due to the fact that it was lunchtime, the group of men staying in the room to his left just so happened to be coming out for a meal as well, and Chan Ping'an intentionally slowed down slightly so that he would be lagging 5 or 6 steps behind the group of men. One of them couldn't help but turn around to look at this strange neighbor of theirs, whom they were seeing only for the first time, but one of the other men in his group quickly tugged on his sleeve, warning him not to start any trouble, and the man immediately looked away. Even though Chan Ping'an was only a young boy traveling on his own, he gave off a sense of calmness and composure well beyond his years, indicating that he was not to be messed with. In the mortal world, this group of men were all figures of decently lofty status, hailing from renowned sects in the cultivation world. But if this unremarkable-looking young boy just so happened to be a powerful swordsman with a short temper, then they could be in a world of trouble. Elsewhere, the chances of encountering a powerful swordsman would be slim to none, but that probability was far greater here on this ship. At times, simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time was enough to get someone killed. If they were to get on the bad side of a powerful cultivator, then they weren't going to be able to talk their way out of a beating or worse. One of the men had once witnessed a swordsman in action from afar. The young swordsman had only been around 20 years of age, but after summoning his bonded flying sword, he was truly an incredible sight to behold, slicing through all of his opposition as if he were cutting down nothing but sheaves of wheat. He had been facing several vastly renowned martial artists at the time, ones who proclaimed that they had indestructible bodies capable of keeping out even the sharpest of blades, but in the blink of an eye, all of them had fallen dead with holes pierced through their heads. The average chi refiner wasn't necessarily a threat. For example, those who followed the 100 schools of thought weren't necessarily all that adept in combat, but provoking a swordsman, particularly one that possessed a bonded flying sword, was no different from courting death. The trip to the restaurant was smooth and uneventful, and Chan Ping'an purchased several kilograms of dry biscuits from the waiter at the packed restaurant, then returned to his room. After closing the door, he opened the door to his balcony and began enjoying a meal of dry biscuit and wine while standing outside. There were still some fishermen on the first floor of the Luchuan, but even after watching them for about half an hour while enjoying his meal, Chan Ping'an only saw some ordinary fish being caught. Not even a single river dragon youngling was hooked up. All of a sudden, Chan Ping'an recalled an occasion where he and Cui Chan had been on the summit of a tall mountain. The latter had been very bored, so he decided to follow Chan Ping'an in practicing his standing meditation. While doing this, he told Chan Ping'an that there was an exceptional blessed land under the heavens, and it was very special in that it was connected to another small world, thereby making it unique from all other blessed lands. The Divine Edict sect of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent's Southern Stream Nation had a blessed land to itself, the Limpid Pond Blessed Land. Blessed lands were rather similar to subsidiary nations, except they were larger and independent. On top of that, the laws of the heavenly Tao inside also varied, and they were often able to produce abundant resources that could be continuously harvested by large immortal sections. As a result of this abundance of resources, many prodigious figures often hailed from these blessed lands, and these prodigies were generally taken by the nations or sects that owned those blessed lands, thereby further bolstering their power. Chan Ping'an had never been out of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent during the past 2 long journeys that he had taken, but even so, he had already developed an idea of just how vast the world was and seen something of the unfathomable things that Old Man Yang had mentioned to him. During this southbound journey, Chan Ping'an had missed out on going to many places, some of which he simply didn't have the time to visit as it would have meant taking massive detours. An example of this was the Cyan Gorge Island of Bamboo Scroll Lake, where Gu Kan and his mother were. Chan Ping'an hoped that they were thriving there, and that they weren't being oppressed than others. Even more than that, he hoped that once Gu Kan became a chi refiner, he wouldn't become like Fu Nanhua, who oppressed those weaker than him. As for some other places they weren't appropriate for him to visit, such as Sun Scorch Mountain, where the mountain-moving ape was, Light Breeze City where the Sioux clan was based, and True Marshall Mountain where Ma Kushwan was staying. No one would listen to him in those places, and he wasn't strong enough to pound his reasoning into the people there with his fists either. Without the protection of Mr. Qi and Master Ruan, he would be stomped to death like an ant, and he was well aware of this. While visiting the restaurant to stock up on rations, Chan Ping'an heard that the ship was going to be stopping at a ferry station for half a day the next day. That allowed passengers the opportunity to disembark from the ship to see the scenery, and there was a renowned scenic spot near the ferry station called the Ancient Pond. At this time of year, the flowers were in full bloom, so all one had to do was exit the ferry station and travel to the nearest hill, and they would be greeted by the aroma of flowers and the sound of birdsong the entire way there. If one were lucky, then they would be able to capture a floral spirit known as the aromatic herb maiden, which gave off a natural faint fragrance. They were the best living perfume sachets, and they were loved by all female qi refiners and wealthy women. Chan Ping'an felt like it would be a good idea to leave the ship and go out for some fresh air. After staying in his room for an entire month, he felt as if he were about to grow mold. After making up his mind, Chan Ping'an returned to his room from the balcony, then closed the door and continued to practice his walking meditation. The next day, the ship docked at the ferry station, and the hall inside the underground cave was petite and exquisitely constructed, with a fragrant aroma wafting through the air. In contrast with the large and majestic ferry station of Watercombing Nation, this one possessed a different charm. The ship was swaying slightly, and Chan Ping'an got out of bed after sleeping for less than 4 hours, then began to pack up his things. He was going to take all of his belongings with him, as he didn't dare to leave any of it in his room. Perhaps the ancient pond had a resounding reputation or was a really great place. In any case, almost all of the passengers on the ship had decided to disembark here for sightseeing. After disembarking from the ship, Chan Ping'an was walking with the crowd, and a group of people was next to him, led by a pair of elderly individuals. Both of them had deep and mellow auras that resembled slow-flowing river water, and walked with a special type of lightness in their step. Even if they weren't immortals of the middle 5 tiers, they couldn't be far away. Chan Ping'an didn't have a habit of eavesdropping on others, but during the past month that he had spent in his room, he had no choice but to overhear the conversations of his neighbor, and now that he was hearing a conversation take place in the official dialect of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, which had proven to be a rare occurrence, he couldn't help but listen. They discussed the state of the continent, some of the latest news from all of the major cultivating sects, and also some news pertaining to some renowned figures on the continent. The conversation was quite casual, and the 2 elderly individuals did most of the speaking, while the young juniors beside them listened respectfully and very rarely interjected. Even if questions were raised, they were done so very respectfully, and that was very different from what Chan Ping'an had seen from others, such as Lu Baqiao of Wind Lightning Field, Chao Jun of the Chao clan on Clayvase Alley, and Zhou Ju of Lakeview Academy, none of whom had such formal and restrained personalities. In the end, one of the elderly men, who had a small black jade seal hanging from his waist, spoke about how the Kuan ship of Ceremony Mountain had crashed, resulting in severe casualties, and he was quite riled up by the subject. He acknowledged that the Tao Master of Complete Reed Continent possessed unfathomable powers, and that perhaps even Tao Master Qi Zhan of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent didn't stand a chance against him, but he was quite critical of how domineering and overbearing the Tao Master was. On the subject of the Kuan ship crash, a concerned look appeared on the other old man's face, and he said that while it was true that the Kuan ship had been struck by a vast eruption of sword qi, he didn't think that any of the empires in the central region of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent were responsible for the incident, as none of them stood to benefit from striking down a ship from Complete Reed Continent. Only a major empire could have been able to gather so much sword qi at once, but the emperor of that empire had already personally traveled to Divine Edict's sect and sworn that he wasn't behind this. After that, he had met Tao Master Xianxia of Complete Reed Continent while accompanied by Qi Zhan to explain the situation, in response to which Xianxia had merely said that the cultivators of Complete Reed Continent would investigate this matter and come to their own conclusion. Chan Ping'an stopped in his tracks, then abruptly sped up to catch up to the pair of elderly men as he cupped his fist in a salute and asked, "Pardon my interruption, esteemed immortals, but may I ask how the passengers on the Kuan ship fared in the wake of the crash?" One of the elderly men paid no heed to Chan Ping'an at all, not even sparing a glance at him as he continued onward. In contrast, the old man with the seal hanging from his waist stopped as he replied in a patient manner, "Almost all of the passengers of the lower 5 tiers were killed, and even many of the passengers of the middle 5 tiers perished. At the time, countless streaks of sword qi had suddenly erupted into the sky from a hill, an attack not inferior to an all-out strike from a sword immortal of the upper 5 tiers, so it was no surprise that there were such severe casualties. The old man could see that this piece of news had dealt Ping'an a heavy blow, and he heaved a faint sigh before continuing onward. Meanwhile, Ping'an stood rooted to the spot, and even as he was jostled by a few of the people passing by, he remained completely oblivious. By the time he finally returned to his senses, he discovered that almost everyone else had already emerged from the cave to see the ancient pond. Ping'an slowly made his way to the entrance of the cave to find that it was a bright and sunny day. There was a mountain with a smooth and even slope further away in the distance, and countless vibrant plants and flowers were in full bloom. After killing the scorpion lady back at the Blusher Prefecture, Ping'an had actually obtained a treasure, but he had decided not to sell it at the Green Beetle shop. It was an ink brush washer, with circle of text on the underside that read, "Spring flowers under the autumn moon. Spring wine through autumn trees. Spring mountains beneath autumn rocks. Spring water giving rise to autumn frost." The characters were tiny, and they swam around slowly like tadpoles. Ping'an really liked the character for spring, and the text also correlated with the names of the pair of maidservants that he had encountered on the Kuan ship. At the time, he had felt a little disappointed that there was only spring water, and no autumn fruit. Otherwise, if he were to ever meet them again, for example, if he were to take the Ceremony Mountain Kuan ship again, then he would have been sure to show them the washer, not to brag, but just to show them that such interesting coincidences were possible. Standing at the entrance of the cave, there was no sorrow of grief on Ping'an's face. Instead, he was merely staring at the wonderful scenery in the distance with a dazed expression. In the wake of this sobering news, he had suddenly lost interest in the scenery, and in the end, he returned to the ship, then continued to practice his fist techniques in his room. Close to another month slowly passed by, and in a few more days, the ship would arrive at its destination. One night, before he had even realized it himself, Ping'an had already completed his 200,000th repetition of walking meditation. He changed into a set of clean clothes, then stepped onto the balcony outside with his shoes off. It was very rare for the ship to be so quiet, and seeing as there was no one else around, Ping'an gently leaped onto the railing, then sat down onto it as he began to drink out of his wine gourd while facing the neighboring river channel. He drank without any thoughts entering his mind, and before long, he discovered that he had run out of wine. The sword nurturing gourd had been filled with close to 10 liters of fine wine brewed by Sword Watervilla, but some of it had been drunk by Su Yuanxia and Zhang Feng. The rest of the wine had only been able to last the past 2 months as Ping'an had been drinking very sparingly. He shook the wine gourd vigorously, but there really was nothing left. However, he refused to give up, raising the wine gourd up high and tilting his head back, trying to squeeze out even just a few more drops, but there was not even a single drop left. Right at this moment, a 4-story ship sailed past in the neighboring river channel, and a passenger staying on the top floor also just so happened to be leaning against the railing, getting some fresh air. She looked on with a stunned expression at the sight of the young boy vigorously trying to shake wine out of a sword-nurturing gourd, then finally gave up and rested the gourd on his lap with a defeated look on his face. She felt as if this young boy had to have drunk so much wine that he had turned stupid from inebriation. With that in mind, she decided to play a little prank on him, raising the green jade wine flagon that she was holding as she yelled, "Over here, little drunkard! I have wine here. You can have it if you want." Ping'an cast his gaze toward the young woman in silence. The green-robed young woman waited for a moment, but received no response, so she decided to toss her flagon straight at Ping'an. The flagon flew through the air in a beautiful arc, but right as it got a few meters away from Ping'an, it suddenly flew back into the young woman's grasp. She burst into laughter, clearly very much amused by her smart little scheme. The two ships passed each other by, and Ping'an continued to sit on the railing expressionless. Had he just stumbled upon an idiot? After replacing the sword-nurturing gourd on his waist, he jumped back down onto the balcony, then went back into his room to continue his fist technique practice. For the first time on this trip, Ping'an went to the restaurant in the dead of night to buy wine, but the restaurant was already closed for business for the day, so he could only return to his room and continue his practice. 1. The maidservants' names are Chun Shui and Qiu Shi, which translate to spring water and autumn fruit, respectively. In the following days, the journey along the Dragon Channel slowly petered out to a conclusion, and the ship was fast approaching the southern end of the channel. Having already completed his target of 200,000 repetitions, Ping'an was no longer as strict and stringent in the rest of his fist technique practice, taking a more relaxed approach instead. The day after his failed attempt to buy wine, he went out during the daytime to buy 3 jars of wine from the restaurant, with which he was able to fill his sword-nurturing gourd. The wine was extremely expensive, and although its flavor was decent, It was not on the same level as the fine brew of Sword Water Villa. Qian Ping'an removed the 2 talismans glued to the wall, both of which were made from ordinary azure talisman paper. One of them was a calming talisman that could help Qian Ping'an focus to a certain degree so that he wouldn't be swayed by outside distractions, and was a commonly used talisman in major Taoist temples of the mortal world during ceremonies. The other talisman was a cleansing talisman that many powerful officials and renowned scholars of the mortal world liked to request from Taoist temples during the summertime. Not only were these talismans able to release faint spiritual energy, they also had a cleansing effect that eradicated dirt and foul odors, ensuring that the room they were in stayed pristine. Both talismans were among the most rudimentary talismans recorded in the authentic death-avoiding book, but despite their basic nature, they had helped Qian Ping'an greatly. Otherwise, the ship owner would never allow him to set foot off the ship. During the past 2 months, Qian Ping'an had been practicing his walking meditation day and night in this room, sweating up a storm this entire time, and without the cleansing talisman, the room would have been completely uninhabitable. Both were disposable talismans, and at this point they had almost completely run out of spiritual energy, so they were barely any different from 2 normal sheets of paper. Qian Ping'an was very accustomed to being cautious and keeping a low profile, so he didn't even discard these used talismans into the river channel, instead stowing them away in his pocket treasure. These were both key contributors to his 200,000 repetitions, so he couldn't just throw them away. At the very least, they would serve as good souvenirs. At this point, Qian Ping'an was all but certain that the stack of talisman paper he had gotten from Li Shixing, particularly the golden ones and the ancient book pages, were extremely valuable, so he had to use them as sparingly as possible. A treasure pagoda demon-suppressing talisman inscribed upon a piece of golden talisman paper was able to easily suppress the officials of the Blusher Prefecture that had fallen into demonic ways, and that was sufficient testament to their value. Another example was the golden armored warrior that one of the top qi refiners of Watercombing Nation had used as his ultimate trump card. That golden armored warrior talisman used paper of clearly inferior quality to the golden talisman paper provided by Li Shixing. Prior to disembarking from the ship, Qian Ping'an made sure to clean up his room and pack up all of his belongings. After returning the wooden badge for his room, he left the ship with everyone else. Not far away in front of him was a couple that was conversing with one another, and Qian Ping'an found the woman's voice very familiar. He took a quick glance in her direction to find that it was a young woman with a mole on the corner of her mouth. This was the very same woman who had been suffering on the ship for the past 2 months. In Qian Ping'an's mind, her love for her husband had to be extremely deep and genuine. Otherwise, there was no way that she would have been willing to put up with such torment. During the disembarking process, Qian Ping'an heard many things. For example, someone had captured an extremely rare pair of twin aromatic herb maidens at the ancient pond. A single one of these plant spirits would only be worth around a dozen snowflake coins, but a pair of twins like these would set one back at least 50 or 60. Over the course of the entire 2-month journey, very few of the fishermen were able to fish up even one river dragon's the length of 2 fingers, and no miracles had taken place. The ship had stopped at quite a few ferry stations on the way to its ultimate destination, and as some of the wealthier qi refiners were disembarking from the ship, many of their pitiable servants were forced to carry a mountain of large and heavy bags on their backs. On top of that, they had to be very careful when they walked so that they didn't damage any of the items inside the bags, many of which extremely precious and worth no less than the carriers' lives. The ferry station was quite large, and it was also packed with shops. Here, the wares peddled by the merchants were specialty local products from the cluster of nearby nations. Qian Ping'an had nothing better to do, so he took a stroll through the hops, and inside, he discovered many different types of spirits, most of which were adorable and energetic plant spirits. Some were in the form of children, some were elderly men and women, and all of them varied in size and appearance. However, even the largest of these spirits was no taller than a finger, and they were either housed in green bamboo cages or standing atop inkstones. There was also a little girl with wings on her back toiling away in front of a tiny spinning wheel, and it seemed that there was no end to the variety on display. Overhearing some of the bargaining, Qian Ping'an came to find out that these spirits were similar in nature to the row of tiny green-robed children standing on the branch of that bonsai plant in the green beetle shop, and their price was determined by their rarity. The cheapest ones only cost a single snowflake coin each, while the most expensive ones could fetch up to 40 snowflake coins. In the end, Qian Ping'an arrived at a conclusion, which was that the further south he went, the more commonplace these spirits seemed to be. Qian Ping'an visited all of the shops in the ferry station, but didn't buy anything. This wasn't because he was stingy. Instead, he was planning to buy some spirits on the way back to the Greatly Empire from the Sword Qi Great Wall. After emerging from the underground cave, Qian Ping'an felt as if he were finally seeing the sun again for the first time in a long time. Once again, the entrance of this cave was riddled with engravings from renowned figures, even more than the one at Water Combing Nation Ferry Station. It was as if all of the engravings were jostling for space, and even the tiniest of spaces had been occupied. Qian Ping'an carefully examined the engravings on the cave entrance. They were all great pieces of calligraphy that varied in style and flair, but deep down, he still felt as if none of them could compare with Cui Chan's calligraphy. Outside, the ferry station was a valley with a wide and smooth path that was lined with shops. These shops appeared more grand and opulent than the ones by the ferry station, and the streets were packed with pedestrians, presenting a lively and bustling sight to behold. Even the stray dogs laying by the side of the road seemed more at ease and well-fed than stray dogs from elsewhere. The first thing that came into view was a small 3-story building on the left. Hanging above the entrance of the building was a golden plaque that read, "Virtuous Maiden Ferry Station." At this point, Qian Ping'an was already familiar with where he needed to go, and he knew that this was the ferry station where the ship that was bound for Old Dragon City was set to depart. After entering the ferry station, he made an inquiry at the counter and was informed that the next ship to Old Dragon City was set to arrive at noon, and that a premium room was going to cost 20 snowflake coins, while a standard room cost 10 snowflake coins. Qian Ping'an asked if there were any rooms that were cheaper than that, and he was told no such rooms existed on the ship, which belonged to the Mutton Fat Hall. All of the people in the hall that had overheard Qian Ping'an's question turned to look at him with derision in their eyes, but he wasn't embarrassed at all as he paid 20 snowflake coins for a jade pendant, on one side of which was engraved the characters Mutton Fat Hall, while Premium Room 11 was engraved on the other. This reminded Qian Ping'an of his Qianxi seal, which he had left back at the bamboo building on Downtrodden Mountain, and he felt this to be a good omen. With that in mind, he made his way out of the hall with a cheerful smile on his face. There was still some time left until the ship was scheduled to arrive, so he decided to do some shopping. He was planning to buy some clothes, but he was going to skip on shoes as he had already grown accustomed to wearing straw sandals over the years, and there were still 2 brand new pairs left in his pocket treasure. The shops on the streets here were far more opulent in appearance, but the wares sold inside were much the same as those in the shops elsewhere, consisting primarily of different types of plant spirits. The spirits being sold here were a little cheaper, and Qian Ping'an felt as if he could easily spend all day looking at these adorable little creatures. However, the fact that he was only looking while making no purchases made him a rather unpopular figure in the eyes of the shopkeepers. Qian Ping'an visited the shops one after another at a leisurely pace, and before long, he arrived at a particularly opulent one. He drew to a halt outside the entrance with a slightly dazed look on his face. As it turned out, there was a screen roughly the same height as a grown man, and depicted on the screen was an image of a woman with a long sword on her back and a purplish golden gourd hanging from her waist. She was standing atop a cliff, looking out at a sea of clouds while her elegant dress gently billowed in the wind, giving her the appearance of a pure and untarnished celestial maiden. This appeared to be an artwork similar to the scenic painting on the Kuan ship. Several people were standing in front of the screen, discussing the visage of the young woman on it with schadenfreude in their voices. Not long ago, Celestial Maiden Su had been one of the most sought-after women under the heavens, possessing pride, beauty, and aptitude in equal measure. Yet she had suffered a dramatic fall from grace as a result of the long-standing feud between Wind Lightning Field and Sun-Scorched Mountain. The only time that she had ever worn clothes outside of her sex attire was when she fought against evil forces alongside the founder of this shop. At the time, she had donned this exact dress, and in the wake of that battle, this style of dress had taken the entire Eastern Treasured Vile continent by storm, with countless female cultivators and wealthy young maidens willing to throw their money at any tailor capable of stitching together such a dress. How laughable is it that this shop is still unwilling to remove this screen? If Su Jia were to see this in person, I think she'd be so embarrassed that she'd dig a hole for herself and crawl into it. A young woman scoffed. In the crowd was a young chi refiner who had been an admirer of Su Jia for many years, and he had been reining in his temper this entire time, but was finally unable to suppress his fury any longer. No matter what has become of Celestial Maiden Su, she's still a pure and pristine immortal. None of you have any right to badmouth her. Let's see you say the same thing to her face. A middle-aged man retorted with a sly grin. Before Su Jia had her Dao heart completely obliterated by that disciple of Li Tuanjing's, I would have been glad to even lick the bottom of her shoe, but now, I don't mean to boast, but if she were to appear before me right now, I would have the courage to squeeze her cheek and wrap my arm around her waist, and what a soft and supple waist that would be. The young chi refiner was so enraged that he began trembling and he yelled, "Who could have possibly given birth to someone as vile and disgusting as you?" "Who? My parents, of course." the man replied in a completely shameless manner. The young cultivators clenched his fists tightly in fury as he glowered intently at the middle-aged man. The man's sly grin grew even wider as he provoked. What, you want to beat me to death? Do it. If you kill someone here, not only will you be punished, your sect will also be held accountable. If you really admire Sujia that much, then surely that's a small price for you to pay. If you don't beat me to death, then I'm going to feel up celestial maiden Sujia on that screen to my heart's content. The middle-aged man stuck out his head as he spoke, challenging the young cultivator to hit him, and the latter could only walk away with a deflated expression. The man immediately burst into mocking laughter. What a pathetic little runt. Don't go running your mouth if you can't back it up. Hey, don't go. Look, I'm feeling up Sujia right now. Oh, her cheeks are so soft and smooth. What a pretty little lass she is.
Celestial maiden sunnuntai mai arse.
She's nothing more than a pitiful little wretch with her sword heart shattered. The next time you see her might just be in a brothel. The young cultivator quickly departed, not wishing to listen to the man's infuriating taunts any longer. Chen Ping'an paid no heed to the bickering outside as he made his way into the shop, then purchased 2 sets of the most ordinary clothes for 30 taels of silver. This was actually a renowned shop that was doing extremely well for itself in the southern region of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, and was only one of the shop's hundreds of branches. Even so, it took only a rough glance for a complete novice like Chen Ping'an to determine that the shop's most prized piece of merchandise, a certain robe, possessed defensive properties that weren't inferior to Chu Hao's suit of divine dew-bearing armor. Even after Chen Ping'an had emerged from the shop, the man was still there. A new group of bystanders had gathered around him, among which there were both men and women, and they were standing in front of the screen. Most of the men had wistful looks in their eyes, while the women were more than happy to see Sujia's downfall, thereby creating a rather stark contrast in attitudes. The middle-aged man was going through his spiel once again, and hearing him speak about Sujia in such a vulgar fashion was a very cathartic experience for all of the envious women gathered around him. Even though they knew that he was a scumbag, upon learning that he was the shopkeeper of the neighboring shop, they still suggested to their male companions to pay the shop a visit. The men were naturally vehemently opposed to this, and instead of visiting his shop, they wanted nothing more than to beat the man senseless. While it was true that the man was very much lacking in morality, he was a shrewd businessman, and the more people gathered around him, the more scathing his insults of Sujia became. The women around him were also quite clever. They didn't want to make themselves look bad, so they never agreed with what the man was saying. Instead, they would rebuke him here and there, making it appear as if they were against him, but in reality they were just fanning the flames. The man was naturally more than happy to oblige, and his insults became more and more vile by the second, much to the elation of the women, who were glancing at their male companions out of the corners of their eyes, as if they were gloating. See how far your beloved Sujia has fallen? Do you still admire her now? The man was becoming more and more animated, and emboldened by the indirect support he was receiving from these women. He made his way over to the screen, then waved his hand back and forth over it to simulate slapping the lifelike visage of Sujia on it while continuing to hurl more insults at her. Chen Ping'an couldn't help but think of how Lu Baqiao was back at the small town while speaking of Sujia. Out of all of the outsiders who had entered Jewel's small world in search of opportunities and treasures, Lu Baqiao was the one of the few people who had left a positive impression on Chen Ping'an. The thing that moved Chen Ping'an the most about Lu Baqiao wasn't his status as a prodigious swordsman of Wind Lightning Field, nor was it the masculine pride that he always spoke with when talking about how someday he was going to make Sujia marry him of her own volition. Someone had then raised an unexpected question. What if Sujia really does set aside the differences between your two sects and fall in love with you someday? What will you do then? The question had left Lu Baqiao completely stumbled, and in the end, he had mumbled a response. How could she possibly fall in love with me? Chen Ping'an couldn't help but be reminded of himself upon hearing this response. For the sake of Lu Baqiao's pure and devoted love for Sujia, Chen Ping'an decided that he had to do something. Thus, he made his way over to the screen and began to stare at the middle-aged man. The man was just about to take the women around him to visit his shop, only for Chen Ping'an to suddenly appear in his way, and a disgruntled look appeared on his face as he asked, "What the hell are you looking at?" "I'm looking at you," Chen Ping'an replied. "Oh yeah? Keep looking at me if you dare," the man threatened. "I will," Chen Ping'an replied with a nod. Even the young women who sorely detested Sujia couldn't help but be amused by this exchange, and they were quite interested to see what was going to happen next. The sect that the women had come from was quite close to Sun-Scorched Mountain, so they would often catch glimpses of the mountain from afar, and it stood like an insurmountable monolith in their eyes. When it came to the prized jewel of Sun-Scorched Mountain, She was greatly admired by all of the men in their sect, who refused to allow anyone to speak ill of their goddess. It was only now that Su Jia had fallen from grace and they were far away from their sect that they were able to vent some of their long-standing and deep-rooted envy. A furious look appeared on the man's face. "Do you have a death wish?" Qian Pingyan shook his head in response. "Then what the hell are you doing standing here like an idiot?" the man yelled. "I'll have you know that my family has been doing business here for generations, and I know more powerful immortals than the number of meals you've had in your life." In response to the man's blatant threats, Qian Pingyan suddenly replied, "Lu Baqiao of Wind Lightning Field like Su Jia." The man was very much taken aback to hear this, and was momentarily at a loss for words. "I know Lu Baqiao," Qian Pingyan continued. The man took a glance at the sword case on Qian Pingyan's back as he gulped nervously, while Qian Pingyan concluded, "If I run into Lu Baqiao someday, I'll tell him about what you've said and done here." The man immediately reverted back to his furious facade as he scoffed. "Who are you trying to fool? A little runt like you knows Lu Baqiao of Wind Lightning Field? I know the sect master of Divine Edict sect, but does he know me? I don't know if he knows you, but I'm certain that Lu Baqiao knows me," Qian Pingyan replied. "Piss off," the man scoffed with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Quit standing here, spouting nonsense and hampering my business. There are flying sword mail services at the ferry station, right?" Qian Pingyan asked. After thinking for a second he continued, "Forget it, I'll just look for one myself." At this point the man was starting to feel a little fearful, and he intentionally ignored Qian Pingyan as he led the group of men and women to his shop. After that, Qian Pingyan really did go to a flying sword mail service. It was situated in a relay station at the end of the street, and for the price of 10 snowflake coins, he sent Lu Baqiao a letter, giving him a brief recount of what he had seen and heard here. As for whether Lu Baqiao would toss the letter away after receiving it, or immediately spring into action and descend upon this place in a thunderous rage, that wasn't something for him to worry about. There were some things that he had to do or it wouldn't sit right with him. Having said that, there were also some things that he wasn't able to do anything about no matter how much it pained him, such as the Kuan ship crash. After informing the people at the relay station of the receiver, and the address that he was sending the letter to, everyone at the relay station immediately began to regard Qian Pingyan with rather strange expressions. At the same time, they became much more respectful in the way that they spoke to and treated him, and someone was even sent to escort Qian Pingyan out of the relay station before asking him whether he needed a guide to the ferry station, to which Qian Pingyan gave a negative response before departing on his own. Qian Pingyan felt better after leaving the relay station. Back in Jewel's small world, Lu Baqiao had carried himself in a rather lackadaisical fashion, and he had even joked around about the idea of becoming brothers with Qian Pingyan, but as it turned out, he was quite a formidable figure in the outside world, the point that even the flying sword mail service here had heard of him. The ferry station where the Mutton Fat Hall ship was docked was hovering in midair on a tall mountain face, and a winding boardwalk had been chiseled into the mountain face, leading up to the ferry station. While walking up the boardwalk, Qian Pingyan spotted many ships that were already hovering in the air outside of the mountain face, and white clouds were drifting through the sky beneath them. These ships were quite similar in style to the ships of Watercombing Nation, but they were somehow able to fly. Qian Pingyan was waiting to board the ship on the boardwalk beside the Mutton Fat Hall's ferry station. A huge cave had been chiseled out here, with only a few merchant stalls set up inside. Qian Pingyan sat down by himself on a bench crafted out of an old tree root, having a meal of dry biscuit washed down with his newly purchased wine. At noon sharp, a ship descended out of the clouds in a smooth and stable fashion before drawing to a halt at the ferry station. Qian Pingyan boarded the ship with the rest of the passengers. This trip to Old Dragon City was only scheduled to take around 25 days to complete, as the Mutton Fat Hall ship was capable of traveling far faster by air than the ships sailing through the Dragon Channel. On top of that, it didn't need to make any stops along the way. It was only a 2-story ship, and Qian Pingyan was staying in a room on the first floor, which was slightly more spacious but had no balcony. The ship began to ascend, passing through the sea of clouds, and Qian Pingyan opened the window to find a stunning view outside. Hanging above him was the bright sun, while a sea of clouds could be seen down below, resembling an undulating golden mountain range under the sun's warm radiance. Qian Pingyan inscribed a calming talisman and a cleansing talisman once again, then continued his fist technique practice. Over the course of the journey there were stormy nights, stunning sunrises, and days where there was no cloud in sight. This time, Qian Pingyan was taking his walking meditation slower than before, and he would occasionally open the window to appreciate the scenery outside during his practice. One day, when the journey was nearing its end, a sword immortal arrived atop his flying sword. At the time, the ship just so happened to have emerged from a cloud. The young sword immortal was trailing along directly behind it, traveling at such an astonishing speed that even some of the chi refiners of the middle 5 tiers on the ship were left in awe. The sword immortal quickly caught up to the ship, carving a wide path through the cloud behind him. Right as he reached the front of the ship, he drew to an abrupt halt, then gently leaped down from his flying sword onto the deck of the ship. He slid his sword back into its scabbard in a graceful fashion, and someone from the mutton fat hall immediately approached him with a warm greeting, making no mention of the fact that it was against the rules for someone to board the ship mid-journey. As it turned out, this was a very wise decision on behalf of the old man. Even though the young swordsman had broken the rules, he wasn't an unreasonable or aggressive individual. Instead, he had a warm smile as he declared his own identity, then produced of 20 snowflake coins without even being requested to do so. The swordsman was none other than Lu Baqiao of Wind Lightning Field. The old master of Wind Lightning Field, Li Tuanjing, had been renowned as the most formidable 10th-tier cultivator, and had dominated Sunscorch Mountain on his own for centuries. Even though it was rumored that Li Tuanjing had already passed away at the end of the recent battle that had taken place between the two sects, he had shattered the formation of true Martial Mountain with a single swing of his sword, an absolutely astonishing feat of power. On top of that, Li Tuanjing's final disciple, Huang He, had burst onto the scene in stunning fashion, displaying an aptitude that wasn't inferior in the slightest to a young Li Tuanjing. Su Jia of Sunscorch Mountain had been no match for him, and the scene where Huang He had trodden upon her sword-nurturing gourd while she lay unconscious at his feet was one that had been deeply imprinted into the memories of everyone present at the time. After Huang He took over as the master of Wind Lightning Field, Lu Baqiao was also able to easily make a breakthrough. In fact, it was said that his progress was so rapid that he had almost broken through 2 tiers in succession. After informing the old man that he was here to find someone, Lu Baqiao made his way to room 11 on the first floor and knocked on the door. Qian Ping'an was still focused on his fist technique practice, and even though he had sensed the aura fluctuations in the cloud behind the ship, he still continued with his practice without pause. It was a common occurrence for immortals to fly past the ship atop their flying swords, so Qian Ping'an hadn't thought much of it. Hence, he was very much taken aback to see the familiar grinning face of Lu Baqiao upon opening his door. Lu Baqiao entered the room, then sat down onto the bed after Qian Ping'an closed the door. He noticed the pair of talismans that Qian Ping'an had inscribed and he jibed, "You're a rich man now, Qian Ping'an." It was only because it was Lu Baqiao that Qian Ping'an hadn't stowed the talismans away before inviting the visitor inside. Qian Ping'an smiled and offered no response to Lu Baqiao's jibes, and he leaned against the windowsill, leaving the whole bed for Lu Baqiao. Lu Baqiao got into a more comfortable sitting position as he said, "Man oh man, was it exhausting chasing after this ship? I set off for the ferry station as soon as I received that letter that you sent to me from the Virtuous Maiden ferry station. You didn't kill anyone, did you?" Qian Ping'an asked. "I didn't get a chance to do so," Lu Baqiao scoffed with a roll of his eyes. "As soon as that bastard heard that I'm Lu Baqiao, he immediately knelt down and kowtowed to me. On the way there I was planning to give him a good beating, but I didn't even get to do that. In the end, I bought the screen from the neighboring shop and put it away in my pocket treasure. After that, I asked around everywhere before I finally found out that you were traveling on this ship, and here I am now. What do you need from me?" Qian Ping'an asked. "Why are you sure that I need something from you? Can't I just pay you a visit for old time's sake?" Lu Baqiao asked. "In that case, why would you chase me all this way?" Qian Ping'an countered. A sheepish look appeared on Lu Baqiao's face as he sighed. "You're so boring. You haven't changed at all since back when you were in Jewel Small World." Qian Ping'an thought about it for a moment, then decided against asking Lu Baqiao about Su Jia. He presumed that Lu Baqiao had been present during the 3 battles on True Martial Mountain, and it definitely wouldn't have felt good for him to see Su Jia suffer such a cruel fate, so Qian Ping'an didn't want to open an old wound. He also considered asking Lu Baqiao whether he had managed to successfully acquire that talismanic sword from the capital city of the Great Li Empire, but he then realized that this was a confidential matter that concerned Lu Baqiao's pursuit of the Great Tao, so he refrained from asking that question as well. In the end, he could only ask the most bland question on his mind. "Do you really not need anything from me? I'm just here to pay you a visit," Lu Baqiao re-emphasized in an exasperated manner. "After I came back from the capital city of the Great Li Empire and returned to Jewel Small World, I discovered that you weren't there anymore. I heard that you set off on a journey to Great Sway Nation, and after that our Wind Lightning Field and the Sunscorch Mountain. Anyway, I was busy the entire time after that. You may think that I'm just a lazy guy who does nothing all day, but I actually only recently came out of seclusion. After consolidating my cultivation base, I was really bored, and I just so happened to receive your letter by flying sword, so I decided to meet up with you and confirm our brotherhood." Lu Baqiao's excessively friendliness was something that Qian Ping'an struggled to cope with, so he didn't respond. A resentful look appeared in Lu Baqiao's eye as he put on an effeminate demeanor, pointing a finger at Qian Ping'an as he said in a high-pitched voice, "How could you be so cold and heartless, young master? Back in your hometown we reveled in each other's company, yet now you cast me aside like an old rag." Qian Ping'an crossed his arms in an expressionless manner as he sat down onto the window sill. Lu Baqiao could try and disgust him all he wanted, but he wasn't going to budge. In the end, this was going to be a battle of attrition. Lu Baqiao was the first to admit defeat, heaving a faint sigh as he said, "I knew you wouldn't have changed one bit since we last met. Right now, all of the swordsmen across Eastern Treasured Vile Continent are astonished by my aptitude, and I've already been singled out as someone who will be sure to reach the upper 5 tiers in the future. Are you not aware of this?" "I was only recently made aware of that," Qian Ping'an replied with a smile. "As soon as the people at the relay station heard that I was writing a letter to you, they immediately became much more polite and respectful, and they even sent someone to escort me to the door as I left. Even after I left, they asked whether I needed a guide, and they were extremely hospitable to me, as if I were some type of important figure. That was the first time I'd ever been treated like that. Haha." Lu Baqiao was rather perplexed by Qian Ping'an's reaction to this. What's he so happy about? Is he this cheerful just because he had received some special treatment for knowing me? However, it didn't take long for Lu Baqiao to figure out why Qian Ping'an was so happy. He was happy just because his friend was doing well. This was a very simple reason, but the world was often too complex a place for such simple reasoning. There were far too many clever people or people who thought themselves to be clever, and in particular after interacting with too many scheming cultivators, one often became unable to wrap their head around the simple things. Even after almost consecutively progressing up 2 tiers, Lu Baqiao hadn't been all that elated, but at this moment, he couldn't help but be put in a good mood, infected by Qian Ping'an's simple and pure joy. Lu Baqiao couldn't help but wonder how he would feel in the same situation. If he had a friend who was doing better than he was, so much better in fact that he would never be able to catch up to them in this lifetime, would he be able to feel the same sense of joy for them? Lu Baqiao was very pleased with his own answer to this question, and he became even more convinced that he and Qian Ping'an were meant to be brothers. After that, Lu Baqiao didn't stick around for much longer. After he came out of seclusion, Huang He, the newly instated Wind Lightning Field Master, had forcibly assigned him with an official post, so he still had many duties left to take care of. Having said that, all he really had to do was pass on these duties to the old men who were far better at taking care of these tasks than he was. With that in mind, he rose to his feet with a smile, then asked, "Are you short on money at all? I have a few dozen lesser heat coins with me. I can lend them to you if you need." Only a wealthy and prodigious swordsman like him would be able to throw around the notion of lending out a few dozen lesser heat coins, as if they were only a few dozen taels of silver. Qian Ping'an jumped down from the windowsill as he replied with a shake of his head, "There's no need for that." A serious look appeared on Lu Baqiao's face as he said, "All right, then I'm going now. Next time you return to Jewel's small world, make sure to remember to come visit me at Wind Lightning Field. Otherwise I'll—" He adopted the same effeminate demeanor from before as he concluded, "Be so heartbroken that I'll drop dead. If you keep talking like that, then I'd rather die before I go to visit you in Wind Lightning Field," Qian Ping'an replied. Lu Baqiao burst into laughter, but there was still a hint of weariness and frailty in his eyes, clearly indicating that he was yet to recover from seeing what had become of Su Jia. He turned to depart, but right as he arrived at the door, he suddenly recalled something and turned around again as he said, "By the way, I have a really good friend over at Old Dragon City. He's a trustworthy guy, so if you need any help, but the flying sword mail service isn't going to be fast enough, then you can go to him. His name is Sun Jiashu and he's the second richest guy in Old Dragon City. I once mentioned you in a letter that I sent to him, so all you have to do is declare your name, and he'll definitely be willing to meet you. On top of that, I'm certain that you two will get along." "Sounds good," Qian Ping'an replied. "There's no need to escort me to the door. If you're too hospitable, it'll make us seem distant. We'll have plenty of opportunities to meet again in the future anyway," Lu Baqiao said, and to his shock, Qian Ping'an really did remain at the windowsill, displaying no intention of escorting him to the door. He couldn't help but shake his head with a resigned smile upon seeing this, and after closing the door, he didn't immediately fly away atop his flying sword. Instead, he made his way over to the elderly Qi refiner of the Mutton Fat Hall who was supervising this ship, and only after chatting with the old man for a while did he finally depart. On the day before the ship arrived at Old Dragon City, the passengers were treated to an extremely rare sight of flying fish leaping out of the sea and soaring into the sky. Millions of flying fish with vibrant and colorful wings were flying through the air, and the ship drew to a halt for an hour to allow the passengers to take in this marvelous spectacle. Furthermore, an explanation for this spectacle was provided. As it turned out, these flying fish were called rainbow phoenix fish, and they were holding this ceremony to celebrate one of their brethren successfully developing a pair of true rainbow phoenix wings, an extremely rare and momentous occasion. However, the people of the Mutton Fat Hall also warned everyone not to try and capture that flying fish that had just attained its rainbow phoenix wings. Otherwise, they ran the risk of provoking the entire school of fish, and that would almost certainly lead to the ship's demise. Unless a golden core tier or nascent tier immortal could swoop in to protect the ship, then it would undoubtedly be torn apart by the scorned flying fish. Everyone was then reassured that rainbow phoenix fish had very kind and gentle natures, and that they didn't fear humans. Instead, whenever they sprang out of the sea to soar through the heavens, they often liked to approach humans, so the passengers had nothing to fear, even though the entire ship had been surrounded by these flying fish. Furthermore, they could even take this opportunity to try and capture a few of these flying fish as pets, and that would serve as an unexpected bonus for the passengers of the ship. Even Chen Ping'an had emerged from his room for this rare spectacle, and he couldn't help but be mesmerized by the stunningly beautiful sight of the countless rainbow phoenix fish soaring freely through the heavens. He leaned on the railing of the ship as he took sips of wine out of his gourd, and sure enough, the school of rainbow phoenix fish began to slowly approach the ship. As they did so, all of them slowed down in unison, and some of the more curious and adventurous ones among them were voluntarily flying closer to the passengers on the ship. If someone were to reach out with their hand, most of the fish would immediately fly away, but there were also some that chose to draw even closer instead, and some would even land on the outstretched hands extended toward them. Chen Ping'an had actually already heard of these fish, as it was said that the revered rainbow robe of the spiritual Horn Force, the largest cultivating sect in colorful garment nation, had been woven using the wings that a rainbow phoenix fish had managed to attain. The wearer of the rainbow robe was granted protection to all mystical abilities, and what was most incredible about this robe was that all flying swords belonging to swordsmen of the middle 5 tiers would retreat on their own upon drawing close to the wearer of the robe. Chen Ping'an also reached out with one hand like many others on the ship, but not a single one of the flying fish was willing to approach him. Thus, he could only sheepishly withdraw his hand and drown his sorrows with more wine. Before long, the ship resumed its southbound journey, and as it docked itself at the Old Dragon City ferry station, Chen Ping'an had finally completed the journey from the northernmost point of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent to its southernmost point. Throughout the thousands of years that Eastern Treasured Vile Continent had been in existence, there had been countless emperors in the north, but in the south, the Fu clan had remained the dominant force this entire time. The Fu clan of Old Dragon City was very wealthy. How wealthy, you ask? The clan had as many as 3 immortal tools that were only slightly inferior to celestial tools, and all of them had been purchased with money. These immortal tools had been passed down from generation to generation, and they were currently in the possession of the clan leader, Fu Qi. Apparently, the Fu clan had only just returned from a trip to Middle-earth Divine Continent, and they had secured another pseudo-celestial tool, and it didn't appear as if they were going to stop adding to their collection anytime soon. The Fu clan had no shortage of interesting people and traditions. For example, they never embellished their genealogical record, and the names of the clan's descendants were never given according to any type of naming convention. Furthermore, women were held in extremely high regard in the clan, and there were too many female clan leaders in the clan's history to count on 2 hands. The members of the Fu clan could read, purchase, and collect books, and some of their private collections contain some of the rarest and most valuable pieces on the entire Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, but they weren't permitted to take part in the imperial examination, nor did they ever serve as officials under any emperor. Even if one were to do nothing with their life, the clan leader would be more than happy to support them. Hence, many exceptionally talented figures had emerged from the Fu clan in the past, excelling in all types of fields such as Go, calligraphy, painting, and music. There were also members of the Fu clan who had written the most classic recipes, published a travel journal that had received vast acclaim and renown across the entire continent, and purchased countless mountains in the vast northern region of the continent, only to leave them there, completely abandoned. There had been countless strange and incredible individuals in the history of the Fu clan, but the clan had one rule that was set in stone, which was that only the most powerful figure of the clan could wear the old dragon robe. The ferry station that the Mutton Fat Hall ship had docked at was close to 200 kilometers away from Old Dragon City, and it wasn't exactly in a secluded location. Close to 100 ships of all descriptions had docked here, and the ferry station was packed with people and teeming with commotion. There were inanimate ships crafted by Mahist artisans, as well as living ships that were similar to Kuan ships, and Chan Ping'an was amazed by everything that he saw while the ship that he was on descended out of the sky. Before the ship arrived at the ferry station, Chan Ping'an had heard that for the mortals who lived in Old Dragon City, one could spend their entire life exploring the city without seeing everything that it had to offer. While the ship was still airborne, Chan Ping'an had attempted to catch a glimpse of the entirety of the city, but unfortunately, his efforts were thwarted by a sea of clouds in the way. Due to Lu Baqiao's visit, the elderly supervisor of the mutton fat hall on the ship had been keeping a close eye on Chan Ping'an, and he approached Chan Ping'an to explain to him that this sea of clouds was a pseudo-celestial tool of Old Dragon City. If one were to look up at the sky from the city, they wouldn't be able to see a single cloud. On top of that, the old man also told Chan Ping'an a breathtaking legend. It was said that sometime around 800 years ago, an army of close to 1,000 evil cultivators had stormed into Old Dragon City. There had been 2 earth immortals among their ranks, as well as 10 golden core tier chi refiners. This group of formidable figures had plotted in secret for close to a century, in order to orchestrate the downfall of Old Dragon City. Their plan was extremely meticulous, and they had made their move during a period of uncertainty in the wake of the old city lord's passing, just prior to the assignment of a new city lord. The Fu clan was already severely worn down due to infighting as the clan's factions fought tooth and nail to secure the position of city lord, and a battle that was particularly worthy of note had taken place between 2 of the patriarchs of the clan. Each of them had wielded a pseudo-celestial tool during the battle, and even with so many restrictions and formations protecting the city, half of the city was still razed to the ground during the course of their battle. In this dire situation, a female chi refiner emerged, seemingly out of nowhere. It seemed that she had been taking a nap in the sea of clouds above Old Dragon City, and when she appeared, she took a glance at the severely ravaged Old Dragon City down below, then turned a disinterested gaze toward the 1,000 or so chi refiners who had stormed into the city. After that, she casually reached out with one hand, and the vast sea of clouds was condensed into a tiny bead that fell into her grasp. She then tossed the bead into her mouth before letting loose an almighty sneeze, and thousands of tornadoes instantly took shape above the southern sea before sweeping toward the north. Among the group of demonic chi refiners who had descended upon Old Dragon City, all of the ones in the lower 5 tiers were wiped out by these ferocious winds, and close to half of the ones in the middle 5 tiers were also eradicated. All of the survivors immediately fled in a blind panic, and after the unrest in the Fu clan was quelled, they sent out people to hunt down these surviving demonic cultivators for an entire century. Chan Ping'an was completely flabbergasted by what he had heard. At the conclusion of his story, the old man asked with an amused smile, "Do you not believe me, young master?" Chan Ping'an shook his head in response. Of course he didn't. How could there possibly be anyone under the heavens who wielded such almighty power that they could kill so many cultivators of the middle 5 tiers with just a single sneeze? The old man stroked his beard with a smile as he said, "To be honest, I don't believe the story either. Even if the heavenly Lord Qizhan of Divine Edict sect were to join forces with the Sword Immortals and Sages of Wind Snow Temple and True Martial Mountain to unleash a collective strike, surely it still wouldn't be so devastating. I can only speculate that the story was embellished over time, and became more and more far-fetched with each passing iteration. Then again, a story would hardly be worth telling if it wasn't so exaggerated and embellished." After bidding farewell to the old man, Chan Ping'an disembarked from the ship, and he was instantly greeted by the sight of tall buildings that stretched as far as the eyes could see, as well as streets so wide that he could scarcely believe his own eyes. Despite how spacious the streets were, they were still completely packed, and Chan Ping'an was quickly developing a headache as he struggled his way through the crowd. At this point, he hadn't even made it into the city yet, and he had no idea how he was supposed to track down the dust medicinal shop where Zheng Dafeng was working. While chatting with the old man from the mutton fat hall earlier, Chan Ping'an had asked him about Stalactite Mountain, wondering if he could get there on an intercontinental ship, but the old man had been completely stumped. Of course, he had heard of Stalactite Mountain, given its resounding reputation. The fact that a Taoist branch master from another world had hammered such a massive nail into Majestic World was both an extraordinary feat and a blatant act of disrespect toward all of the sages whose statues were worshipped in the Confucian temples. However, the old man had never heard of any ships from the ferry station in Old Dragon City that could travel to Stalactite Mountain. In fact, the old man didn't even know Stalactite Mountain's exact location. The extent of his knowledge was that it was quite close to southern world continent. Hence, Chan Ping'an had no idea where to go after disembarking from the ship, and he would just have to take things one step at a time. First and foremost, he was going to focus on completing the journey of close to 200 kilometers to reach Old Dragon City. On the way there, he made sure to frequently ask for directions to ensure that he didn't stray off the correct path. and he quickly noticed that there were no pedestrians walking down the center of the streets. Instead, those parts of the streets were occupied entirely by carriages and mounted steeds. There were carriages drawn by horses and various other types of beasts, as well as people riding atop steeds such as tigers, serpents, tortoises, and cranes. Even though all of them were chi refiners, everyone was traveling in a very orderly fashion with no one daring to barge ahead. Old Man Yang, Cui Chan's grandfather, and Weibo had all advised him that it was best for him to reach the 4th tier before he got on the ship from Old Dragon City to Stalactite Mountain. Hence, prior to that, Qian Pingyuan was in no hurry to continue his journey. However, for some reason, as soon as he set foot in the territory of Old Dragon City, he was struck by a burning desire to get to Stalactite Mountain as soon as possible, and whether he reached the 4th tier or not before that no longer mattered all that much to him. Having already traveled the entire eastern treasured vile continent from the north to the south, he had completed a journey of millions of kilometers, yet not once during the course of this journey had felt such an intense sense of urgency. Hence, he made his way over to what appeared to be a relay station on the side of the street, and in a complete departure from his normal stingy ways, he spent 10 snowflake coins to hire a carriage drawn by a pair of majestic white horses. The coach driver wasn't the typical sturdy young man. Instead, it was a young girl with above-average looks and a naturally refreshing disposition. She wasn't shy or reserved at all, and after Qian Pingyuan got onto the carriage, she suggested for him to sit beside her so that she could introduce to him some of the renowned shops that lined the streets along the way, as well what wares were sold in these shops. She had grown up her entire life in the ferry station outside Old Dragon City, so she was very familiar with the area, and she assured Qian Pingyuan that he wouldn't regret having her as his coach driver. The carriage slowly trundled through the crowd, but as soon as it reached the central area of the street, it immediately accelerated under the young girl's whip, racing toward the western gate of Old Dragon City alongside all of the other carriages around it. Qian Pingyuan was seated behind the young girl, having his usual meal of dry biscuit, but this time, he refrained from drinking as he had stowed his sword-nurturing gourd away into the cloth pouch on his back prior to disembarking from the ship. Weibo had once warned him that cultivators above the golden core and nascent tiers were able to see through the illusion that he had cast and recognize the sword-nurturing gourd, so it was best to keep it concealed as a safety precaution. The young girl was very chatty and outgoing, and she seemed to never run out of things to say, giving Qian Pingyuan brief rundowns out the history of all of the shops and tall buildings that they passed by, as well as which powerful immortals resided in those buildings and what notable feats these immortals had accomplished. In some other parts of the continent, even 5th-tier demons were referred to as great demons, yet here in Old Dragon City, Qian Pingyuan felt like he had finally found a place where immortals of the middle 5 tiers were just as common as they were back in the small town. Qian Pingyuan asked the girl if she had heard of the Dust Medicinal Shop, to which she replied that she hadn't. She told Qian Pingyuan that she hadn't actually seen all that much of Old Dragon City as it was far too massive, and it was split up into the outer city, the inner city, and the Fu City. For outsiders, a hefty entrance fee had to be paid in order to pass through each city gate, and that fee applied even to golden core and nascent tier cultivators. Hence, she had only been to the outer city of Old Dragon City a few times, and after each trip, her money pouch was sure to be completely deflated. However, for members of the Fu clan and any of the city's other 5 major clans, not only were they exempt from this entrance fee, they could even fly through the inner and outer cities as they pleased. Of course, if one had the resources and connections required to purchase an old dragon cloud flipping pendant, then they could also fly through the entire city without any constraints, with the exception of the Fu City. The young girl then asked Qian Pingyuan to guess how much an old dragon cloud flipping pendant cost. Qian Pingyuan made as high of a guess as he could possibly comprehend, a guess of 1,000 snowflake coins, equivalent to 1,000,000 taels of silver. The young girl immediately burst into laughter, then turned around and extended a hand toward him, splaying all 5 of her fingers apart as she declared, "Try 5,000. Qian Pingyuan was astonished by this answer, but his astonishment was outweighed by the panic of seeing the young girl turn around to face him, and he hurriedly urged, "Please focus on driving the carriage." The young girl chuckled with amusement as she turned back around, then raised her chin in a proud manner as she declared, "I don't mean to brag, young master, but even if I let go of the reins and close my eyes, this carriage will still be able to make it all the way to the western city gate without a hitch. I'm only pretending to drive diligently so my customers don't grow concerned." "Don't just pretend," Qian Pingyuan protested in a feeble voice. "All right, I'll make sure to be extra diligent just for you," the young woman chuckled. Qian Pingyuan couldn't help but be infected by her cheerful mood, and a smile appeared on his face as well. A light breeze was caressing his cheeks as he turned to look at the thriving streets around him. Strangely enough, even though he had regularly been exposed to the elements during this southbound journey, his skin had somehow become a little fairer, and his complexion no longer resembled the color of the coals that he had worked with back in the Dragon Kills. Perhaps the young girl had eyes on the back of her head, but she somehow seemed to be aware that Qian Ping'an was inspecting the surrounding scenery. She took advantage of this opportunity to turn around, then quickly turned back to face forward again, sneaking a furtive glance at the side profile of Qian Ping'an's face in between. He wasn't particularly handsome, but he was quite nice to look at. "You're quite good-looking, young master," the girl chuckled. Qian Ping'an's mood had been buoyed by the girl's cheerful disposition, and he cracked a rare joke as he asked, "If I let you take a few more looks at me, can you give me a discount of 1 snowflake coin?" The fact that Qian Ping'an was capable of making such a joke at all was a clear indication that bad influences like Aoyang, Su Yuanxia, and Lu Baqiao had rubbed off on him. The young girl smiled as she replied, "No can do. From the relay station to the city gate and back is a trip of close to 300 kilometers, and I have to make 10 of these trips to earn a single snowflake coin." "That sounds like quite a hard job," Qian Ping'an sympathized. "Not at all," the young girl disagreed with a firm shake of her head. "I've always really liked running around all over the city, so I really enjoy this job. Even if I can buy my own shop in the future and end up earning a ton of money, I'll still drive my own carriage around. In doing so, I'll be able to meet lots and lots of people just like you, young master." A slightly dejected look then appeared on her face as she sighed. "But all of the shops here are so expensive. I don't think I'll be able to save up enough money in this lifetime." "Oh well, life's pretty great as it is," the girl concluded, and she was instantly back to her usual cheerful self again. Qian Ping'an also smiled as he offered some words of encouragement. "Just keep working hard and take it one day at a time. Aim to be richer than you were yesterday, and tomorrow, aim to be richer than you are today." The young girl was instantly reinvigorated, and she turned around to give Qian Ping'an a bright smile. Due to his previous run-in with Fu Nanhua, Qian Ping'an had a very negative impression of Old Dragon City, one that wasn't much better than his impression of Sunscorched Mountain. However, he was genuinely fond of this cheerful girl from the bottom of his heart. Of course, there was no romantic affection. Instead, he felt like the girl was the personification of a sunflower, and he really liked to spend time with people like her. Zhang Shanfeng and Su Yuanxia also instilled him with the same sense of positivity. The young girl continued to introduce the landmarks in the city, while Qian Ping'an listened and observed. The time quickly flew by, and no more than 2 hours later, Qian Ping'an could already see the walls of Old Dragon City's outer city. The walls were far taller than the walls of any city or pass that he had seen in the past, and right before the trip was about to conclude, Qian Ping'an asked, "By the way, do you know Sun Jiashu?" "Who?" The young girl swung around with a bewildered expression. "Sun Jiashu," Qian Ping'an repeated. The young girl immediately burst into laughter, and she was only able to contain her mirth once the carriage had drawn to a halt. All of a sudden, she rose to her feet and pointed a finger at the street behind her, then swept her arm through the air in a huge circle as she asked, "You see all of this, young master?" Qian Ping'an nodded in response. A wide smile appeared on the girl's face as he continued. "All of the shops that lined the street leading from the city gate all the way to the ferry station belonged to him." Qian Ping'an was astonished to hear this. "All of these shops belong to Sun Jiashu?" "That's right. They all belong to young Master Sun," the young girl replied with a proud expression, as if she were the owner of these shops instead. She then lowered her voice and put on a mysterious expression as she continued. "I've heard from my boss that young Master Sun is a really great guy. Even though he's a fantastic businessman, he's also an extremely kind person, and even the grouchiest old men I've come across have never had anything bad to say about young Master Sun and his seniors. Some years ago, there was a huge fire on this street, and close to 3,000 of the Sun clan's shops were burned down. At the time, young Master Sun had only just become the clan leader, and not only did he not aim to press charges and assign blame, he helped everyone reconstruct their shops with money out of his own pocket. I've also heard many women say that young Master Sun is extremely handsome, so he's definitely the most handsome and most kind-hearted man in all of Old Dragon City." The carriage was still a few hundred meters away from the city gate, and the entire street leading up to the city gate was packed with similar carriages. Right at this moment, a young man wearing a plain white linen robe made his way out of the crowd before arriving beside the carriage that Qian Ping'an was on. The man was tall and very handsome, but he didn't exude an air of superiority. Instead, there was a very clean and pure disposition about him, as if he were a refined and elegant scholar who came from a highly educated family. There were many pedestrians rushing through the gaps between the carriages on either side of the street, and someone inadvertently bumped the man's shoulder as he was passing by. The former hurriedly apologized, to which the man merely shook his head with a smile. The young girl turned to Old Dragon City with an absent-minded look on her face as she murmured, How could there be someone as great as young Master Sun in this world? Chen Ping'an had no response for this. The young man smiled as he cast his gaze toward Chen Ping'an and the young girl, then said to the latter, "Thanks for the compliment." "Compliment? What compliment?" the young girl asked as she turned to him with a perplexed expression. The young man offered no explanation as he turned to Chen Ping'an, then asked, "You're Chen Ping'an, right? I'm Lu Baqiao's friend. I received a letter by flying sword from Lu Baqiao not long ago, so I came here to wait for you." Speaking to someone from a vantage point was considered to be quite rude, so Chen Ping'an jumped down from the horse-drawn carriage, then asked, "Are you?" "That's right, I'm Sun Jiashu," the man confirmed with a nod. The young girl heaved a sympathetic sigh. "How did you end up with the same name as young Master Sun? That must really suck for you." The young man remained silent with an amused smile on his face. The young girl bade farewell to Chen Ping'an, then turned her carriage around before departing. Chen Ping'an made his way toward the western city gate of Old Dragon City alongside Sun Jiashu, and as he did so, he couldn't help but ask, "Sun, young Master Sun, is it really true that you own this entire street?" Sun Jiashu made no attempt at modesty as he smiled and nodded in response. "During our Sun clan's heyday, the entirety of the outer city was ours. However, since that time, Old Dragon City has continued to expand, and our Sun clan made several bad major business decisions, so we're no longer as wealthy as the Fu clan. Having said that, we're still a very wealthy clan." Chen Ping'an snuck a glance at Sun Jiashu to find that he wasn't wearing any accessories, and nothing about his attire hinted at his wealth at all. Sun Jiashu smiled as he asked, "Are you looking for an old dragon cloud-flipping pendant? No one in our Sun clan owns such a thing. To be honest, many of us want to buy one, but we have a set of rules passed down from our ancestors prohibiting us from spending excessively on non-necessities, and those rules are pretty much set in stone, so I can't go against them. It's honestly a bit of a pain in the backside." Chen Ping'an wanted to say something, but didn't seem to know where to start. "Do you want to ask if I can return those 20 snowflake coins to you? I'm afraid the answer to that question will have to be no. In my books, friendship and business do not mix," Sun Jiashu said. Chen Ping'an scratched his head as he said, "What I wanted to ask is, are we just going to walk all the way to your house? Old Dragon City is enormous, isn't it?" Sun Jiashu remained silent as he observed Chen Ping'an with a smile on his face. Chen Ping'an sighed as he admitted, "Fine, I'll admit that I wanted to ask you about the 20 snowflake coins. If you're not going to return the money, then just forget it." "No wonder Lu Baqiao told me that we would get along really well," Sun Jiashu chuckled. "Do people often call you stingy as well?" Chen Ping'an asked with a curious expression. A combination of amusement and exasperation appeared on Sun Jiashu's face, as he shook his head in response. "Lu Baqiao says that both of us are poor, but like to act like we're rich." Chen Ping'an was completely perplexed to hear this. How could someone like Sun Jiashu possibly be referred to as poor? "I have a rather unique ability that allows me to see the wealth that slipped through someone's fingers," Sun Jiashu suddenly said. He then stopped in his tracks and turned to look at Chen Ping'an as he continued, "I can tell you now that the combined value of the things that you've given away is worth more than the entirety of Old Dragon City." Inside the inner city of Old Dragon City was a secluded alley, within which was a newly opened medicine shop. It was a tiny shop, but the male shopkeeper had hired 7 or 8 beautiful women, all of whom had one shared trait, which was the long and slender legs. The man did nothing but laze around and flirt with his female employees all day long, seemingly completely unconcerned about the shop's business. On the surface, the women would all respond to his sexual approaches with shy and embarrassed expressions, but as soon as they turned around, they would roll their eyes in disgust. On this day, the man was sitting on a small stool at the entrance of the alley, munching on some sunflower seeds while watching the women that were passing by on the street with bright and attentive eyes. "I've hired some real beauties, but the grass really is always greener on the other side," the man thought to himself. Right at this moment, another woman passed by right before his eyes. She was dressed in very bold and vibrant attire, and as for her appearance and figure, the fact that the man had already dropped his sunflower seeds to chase was a better description of her beauty than any words could manage. After submitting the entrance fee, Chen Ping'an and Sun Jiashu passed through a tunnel that seemed to stretch on for an eternity before they finally entered the city. From there, Sun Jiashu led Chen Ping'an onto a spacious horse-drawn carriage. The carriage was a little larger than the average carriage, while the horses were also more well-trained than normal, but aside from that, there was nothing to suggest that the carriage belonged to a wealthy clan. The coach driver was a serious-looking old man, and only after Chen Ping'an entered the carriage did he come to discover that there was more than met the eye. Inside the carriage were 4 white cushions, and there was a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf fully stacked with books situated against the wall across the carriage's curtain. There was also a copper incense burner in the carriage releasing faint wisps of fragrant purple smoke. Chen Ping'an and Sun Jiaxu sat down across from each other, and Chen Ping'an was feeling rather uncomfortable, fearing that his straw sandals would dirty the carriage's pristine interior. Sun Jiaxu took a glance at Chen Ping'an's straw sandals, and a faint smile appeared on his face as he said, "Back when I was a little boy, my grandfather took me to travel everywhere in accordance with a tradition that's been passed down in our clan for generations. Before I turned 18, I went to a new place virtually every year. I've worked as a shop employee, a fisherman, a farmer, a steward. All types of jobs were thrown my way. During those years, I also learned to weave straw sandals, but mine are very shoddy. They're nowhere near as sturdy as yours." Sun Jiaxu sat atop one of the cushions in the carriage with his legs crossed, and even though he was sitting in a very upright manner, he still exuded a casual air of comfort. He smiled and asked, "Would you care to take a guess at which piece of farm work I dreaded the most back then?" Chen Ping'an wasn't a clairvoyant or a mind reader, so he was naturally unable to guess the answer to that question. Furthermore, in his eyes, Sun Jiaxu was a very strange person. Even though they had only just met, the more time they spent together, the murkier his impression of Sun Jiaxu became. Sun Jiaxu smiled as he continued, "It was collecting mulberry leaves. I would toil away for hours to collect a full basket of leaves, only for my grandfather to gently press down onto the leaves, and an entire basket of leaves would instantly be reduced to only half full. I would fill the basket again, only for another gentle press to erase hours of hard work, and this cycle of repetition was one that filled me with despair. On top of that, each time I went up into the mountains, my legs would be cut up by all of the abrasive weeds and shrubs, creating a bunch of tiny gashes that would sting intensely when I began to sweat. In contrast, I much prefer being latched onto by leeches while planting rice shoots in the rice paddy fields. My grandfather was a heavy smoker, and those leeches would fall off as soon as they were burned by my grandfather's pipe." Chen Ping'an was very familiar with these struggles himself, and he replied, "Back home, those leeches were a real problem for me as I didn't want to have to use any salt or vinegar on them. It would always take me a lot of time and effort to pull them out, and by the end my legs would always be bleeding. Thankfully, there's a type of grass that we call green maidens that grows by the rice paddy fields, and they're really good for stopping bleeding. I haven't seen them anywhere after leaving my hometown." Sun Jiaxu smiled as he nodded in response. Those who live in true poverty are often a bit rougher around the edges, but they also have a higher capacity for suffering. No matter how many of these jobs were assigned to me, at my core, I'm still a complacent young master from a wealthy clan, so I still can't compare with someone like you. When I first started traveling with my grandfather, I would constantly throw tantrums and demand to be taken back home. Thinking back now, if I were to have a grandson like myself, I definitely wouldn't be able to treat him with the same degree of patience that my grandfather afforded me. If such a day really does come, perhaps you'll be different. Perhaps your personality will have mellowed out by then," Chen Ping'an said with a smile. Sun Jiaxu was slightly taken aback, and nodded in response. Perhaps so. One of them was a man who owned the entire street outside of Old Dragon City, while the other was a boy who had supposedly passed up things that were worth even more than the entire Old Dragon City, yet they were discussing these trivialities as if it were the most normal thing in the world. The carriage continued onward in a smooth and stable fashion, and even though smoke had been rising up from the incense burner this entire time, the carriage didn't become filled with smoke. Instead, there was only a subtle and refreshing fragrance in the air. With all of those shops that you have to manage, surely you're losing a ton of money by coming out all this way to meet me. You could have just sent someone else, Chen Ping'an said. Sun Jiaxu shook his head in response. Earning money is one thing, but how one spends their money is an entirely different matter. When I'm doing business, I have to be extremely meticulous down to every last copper coin, and I do work my backside off to earn money, but why do I do this? It's precisely so that I don't have to be stingy and pedantic when it comes to making friends. That makes a lot of sense, Chen Ping'an said with an enlightened expression, and he had to fight back the urge to pull out one of the small bamboo slips in his pocket treasure and engrave what Sun Jiaxu had just said upon it. Over the rest of the journey, the two of them thoroughly enjoyed each other's company. Sun Jiaxu told Chen Ping'an many stories from his past, and Chen Ping'an had always been a very good listener. As more time passed, his impression of Sun Jiaxu began to clarify again, and he determined that Sun Jiaxu was a very rich yet easygoing person. Sun Jiaxu never bragged about his wealth, nor did he feign excessive modesty to try and make others feel less intimidated. Instead, he acknowledged that he had more privileged financial circumstances than the vast majority of people, yet he still treated others as equals in spite of that. Chen Ping'an felt was what all wealthy people should aspire to be like. Some time later, the carriage arrived somewhere in the countryside. The street had turned into a dirt road, so the carriage was trundling along in a rather bumpy fashion. Sun Jiashu could see that Qian Pingyan was a little perplexed by this, so he smiled and pulled up the curtain to reveal a large thicket of lush and vibrant reeds outside. As the carriage continued onward, a meadow of rapeseed flowers came into view, presenting a very pleasant sight to behold. The flowering period of rapeseed flowers should have already passed by long ago, but Qian Pingyan merely presumed that this was because the natural conditions in Old Dragon City were different from those of his hometown. These are the ancestral grounds of our Sun clan, and we've always tried to preserve its original appearance as much as possible so that we don't disrupt the ancestral feng shui, as well as to pay homage to our ancestors, Sun Jiashu explained. Whenever our Sun clan receives esteemed guests such as powerful cultivators or high-ranking officials and emperors, we always take them to the Sun Manor in the inner city. It's a very opulent place that's not inferior to the Fu clan's Old Dragon Manor. However, when it comes to my true friends, I like to bring them here. Our Sun clan's ancestral residence is a few kilometers up ahead. It's not a very large place, but it's very close to a river, so it's great for fishing. I hope you'll like it. Of course I will, how could I not? Qian Pingyan replied with a bright smile. Sun Jiashu also smiled as he proposed. How about we walk the rest of the way there? Qian Pingyan naturally raised no objections to this, and thus, the two of them got out of the carriage and began to walk to Sun clan's ancestral residence. On the way there, Sun Jiashu told Qian Pingyan some more things about these ancestral grounds, casually mentioning that the Su clan owned the entire area in a radius of several dozen kilometers, encompassing 6 villages that contained around 2,000 households. Whatever these households produced, such as silk threads and tea leaves, were all purchased by the Sun clan at slightly higher than market price, so all of the village's residents had decent incomes and led secure and happy lives. This gave Qian Pingyan a clearer understanding of the enormity of Old Dragon City and the generosity of the Sun clan. As the outlines of the Sun clan's ancestral residence came into view, Qian Pingyan asked, "Is there an intercontinental ship from Old Dragon City to Stalactite Mountain?" Sun Jiashu nodded in response. There is. Old Dragon City is the largest business hub on the entire Eastern Treasured Vile continent, so there are ships leading to any place where money can be made. However, not everyone has the wherewithal to earn money from the Sword Qi Great Wall. Even when it comes to the Fu clan, our Sun clan, and the other major clans of Old Dragon City, a great deal of care has to be taken when doing business with the people at the Sword Qi Great Wall. A reminiscent look appeared in Sun Jiashu's eyes as he continued. Over the course of the past few thousand years, all of the 5 major clans with the exception of our Sun clan have already changed many times, and the majority fell due to their certain matters related to Stalactite Mountain. The few major crises that our Sun clan went through were also all related to the Sword Qi Great Wall. Right now there are only 6 ships in Old Dragon City that can travel to Stalactite Mountain, 2 of which are owned by the Fu clan. The 6 ships are all massive, able to hold over 2,000 passengers per trip. The Fu clan ships are a treasure-swallowing whale and a floating mountain crafted by master Mahist artisans, and the latter is known as a miniature stalactite mountain. A hint of self-deprecation surfaced in Sun Jiashu's eyes as he spoke, but a smile then appeared on his face as he continued. By the way, the Fu clan and our 5 major clans of Old Dragon City are all followers of commercialism of the 100 schools of thought. Hence, the figures revered in our clans are different from the Confucian sages being worshipped in Confucian temples. However, even now, commercialism still isn't considered to be an official teaching. I heard that a very long time ago, a sage from one of the Confucian schools ranked quite highly in the Confucian temples once denounced commercialism by comparing it to a dish of dog meat, which is considered to be unfit for presentation in a meal. This may sound like quite a scathing assessment, but it's actually quite a flattering one, given some of the other remarks that have been directed at commercialism. We're known as filthy merchants who reek of the stench of money and disgraces to the 100 schools of thought. Merchants are denounced as universally unscrupulous scoundrels who would gladly sell even their mothers for the right price. And as far as some people are concerned, commercialism is the worst thing to have ever blighted this world. This is why even though there are so many followers of commercialism in this world, you'll never see any being officially endorsed by any of the empires. When it came to these matters related to the inner workings of the 100 schools of thought, all Qian Pingyan could do was listen, and he didn't dare to raise any opinions of his own. Upon reaching the Sun clan's ancestral residence, which was quite a small place, the two of them were not greeted by any beautiful maidservants. Instead, there were only around a dozen elderly men and women looking after the residents. Sun Jiashu treated Qian Pingyan to a meal that was nowhere near lavish, but nor could it be considered crude and unsightly. All of the ingredients were in season and had been sourced from near the residence, and the main dish was a seafood soup. However, Qian Pingyan was accustomed to eating dishes made from freshwater ingredients, so he wasn't all that fond of the soup. Sun Jiashu didn't encourage him to eat more soup, instead merely telling Qian Pingyan to eat whatever he pleased. After the meal, the two of them went on a stroll on the bank of the river outside the residence, and Qian Pingyan asked, "Young Master Sun, have you heard of a place called the Dust Medicinal Shop in Old Dragon City?" Sun Jiashu thought about it momentarily, then replied, "I haven't, but I can track it down for you very quickly." Qian Pingyan gave a grateful response, to which Sun Jiashu waved a dismissive hand with a smile, indicating that Qian Pingyan didn't have to be so polite. He then bent down to pick up a flat and smooth rock before hurling it over the water at a low trajectory, skipping it toward the other bank. On the other side of the river was a rapeseed blossom field that shimmered like a field of gold under the light of the sun. Qian Pingyan had already set his belongings down in the room that he was staying in, but of course, he was still carrying the sword nurturing gourd and the sword case with him. He removed the gourd from his waist before taking a swig of wine while looking out at the calm river, looking much like a relaxed and serene old man. Sun Jiashu stopped in his tracks as he said, "By my estimates, there should be 3 ships setting off Stalactite Mountain soon, while the other 3 ships are still yet to return. One of those is our Sun Clan's Mountain and Sea Turtle, while the other 2 are the Fu Clan's Treasure Swallowing Whale and the Fan Clan's Osmanthus Island. From a safety perspective, I advise you to pick the Treasure Swallowing Whale. Over the past decade, the climate in the intercontinental channel to Stalactite Mountain has been very hostile, and our mountain and sea turtle is not as safe or stable as the treasure-swallowing whale. In fact, even Osmanthus Island is superior in that regard. No matter how mild and docile the mountain and sea turtle is, it's still a living creature, and the Kuan ship incident that took place in the central region of Eastern Treasured Vial continent is an example of how traveling on a living vessel can go wrong. In contrast, the treasure-swallowing whale can swim through the deep sea, so it's not exposed to the elements at all. Additionally, that channel is a well-established one, and the Fu clan has already determined the best route to avoid all of the great demons in the sea. Having said that, if you're looking for comfort and affordability, then look no further than our mountain and sea turtle. I can't guarantee that the trip will be particularly enjoyable, but at the very least, you won't have to worry about food or shelter on our mountain and sea turtle." Qian Pingyan hesitated momentarily, then replied, "I'm definitely not going to choose the treasure-swallowing whale, so it'll have to be either the mountain and sea turtle or Osmanthus Island." "Why is that?" Sun Jiashu asked with a surprised expression. A slightly embarrassed look appeared on Qian Pingyan's face as he replied, "Back in my hometown I almost killed Fu Nanhua, so there's no way I would dare to travel on one of their ships." Sun Jiashu clasped a hand firmly down onto Qian Pingyan's shoulder as he exclaimed, "Qian Pingyan, I've met many young and courageous heroes, but none as bold as you are." Qian Pingyan heaved a faint sigh upon hearing this. It was clear from what Sun Jiashu had just said that Fu Nanhua was not someone that he should have messed with. Sun Jiashu was holding back the urge to laugh, but ultimately he was unable to do so. There's more than one potential heir to the position of City Lord of Old Dragon City, and there are also quite a few people eligible to inherit that old dragon robe. But everyone knows that Fu Nanhua is the one that City Lord Fu Qi holds in the highest regard, and one of the patriarchs of the Fu clan, who holds a pseudo-celestial tool, is Fu Nanhua's master. Having said that, that patriarch has been in seclusion for the past few years, and it's said that he's attempting a breakthrough to the upper 5 tiers. Hence, Fu Nanhua has the best chance out of anyone to become the next city lord. With all of that, I am truly impressed, Qian Pingyan. If word were to spread that you had almost killed Fu Nanhua, then I guarantee you that you'll be a household name across half the continent within a month. I'd rather not have such a reputation, Qian Pingyan replied with a resigned expression. Sun Jiashu was chortling with mirth as he continued, "I've met Fu Nanhua on many past occasions, and I would even say that we're decently close friends. Of course, Lu Baqiao is a far dearer friend to me than Fu Nanhua. The fact that my first response to hearing about Fu Nanhua's misfortune is to laugh is a clear indication that I'm not a good person, so you better be careful around me, Qian Pingyan. If you decide to become my friend, make sure you keep your wits about you and don't go spilling your guts too soon." To be honest, I don't know Lu Baqiao very well. In fact, we've only met twice in total, Qian Pingyan admitted.